Just a minute. I meant to do that before. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman, you're live on YouTube.
Okay, thank you very much. Want to welcome everyone to Senate Transportation. We've got a new group and excited to get going this morning. For me, it's kind of coming full circle. The first committee meeting that I ever had the opportunity to represent District 27 was on the Transportation Committee, working for Chairman Von Flatern. Want to send a shout out to Senator Von Flatern and thank him for all of his work over the years. I want to mention to the committee that I've asked Senator Pappas to serve as the vice chairman of the committee. And so if I need to go get another cup of coffee or have to step out because I was offended or something like that, Senator Pappas will grab the gavel and take it forward. We're going to miss Senator Anderson this morning. As some of you know, Senator Anderson over the Christmas holiday suffered a skiing accident and is still healing up from all of that. And he has been unable to swear in, which by Constitution, you have to do in the Senate chamber down in Cheyenne. And the good senator has not been able to get down there to do that. So he is not allowed to participate with us today. We will miss him. He brings a good background to the Transportation Committee. So we're kind of like the Marine Corps this morning, senators. We're the few, the proud. It goes without saying that the Wyoming Senate is a place where we expect decorum and civility, and we're never going to lower that bar. Even though it feels like some places across the world these days, maybe that's gone by the wayside a little bit. It's not going to in the Wyoming Senate. And so I look forward to working with you senators in a very civil and professional way. And I think we can do some great work on behalf of Wyoming. I want to thank Amanda and Katie for staffing this. This committee meeting for the public and for us senators is technically in the middle of a session. So this is a Senate committee meeting, and we'll try to operate it that way. By now, I think everyone has probably participated in one of these meetings this week. So hopefully it's becoming a little more familiar, but I did want to remind our public particularly that the meeting is being streamed live on the legislature's website, which is wyoledge.gov. There's a link on the homepage. Audience members not wishing to testify are encouraged to listen in via YouTube. If you do want to testify on one of these bills today, you can do so by going to the legislative website, to our committee meeting site, and you'll see where you can click on the testify button and join the meeting. When the time comes, when I call for public testimony, we will ask you to raise a virtual hand, and then Amanda, Katie, or myself will bring you into the meeting, and you'll be able to testify in front of our committee. So I think that just about covers it. We will proceed this morning with Senate File 12, Selective Service Registration. And Katie, I'm not aware if we have anyone coming this morning to walk us through this bill. I thought maybe we did, but have you heard from anyone?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to call the roll first, please.
Oh, thank you very much for the reminder. Let's call the roll.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee. Senator Furphy?
Here.
Senator McCown?
Senator, you're muted, so just thank you.
Present.
Senator Pappas?
Here.
And Chairman Landon?
Here. Thank you, Katie. And before we do go to Senate File 12, I did want to do something real quickly this morning that I thought was was done on another committee, and I enjoyed for a minute. Since we are kind of new to this committee and new to each other, I'd like for each one of us to have an opportunity to say a few words about our district and what brings us here and what's going on in our world. So Senator Furphy, would you be willing to make an introduction this morning?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Dan Furphy, Senate District 10, which is mostly centered in Laramie, but covers a lot of Albany County. We're probably one of the more liberal areas. So I was fortunate to get elected as a Republican, but I look forward to working on this new committee for me, and I've got a lot to learn and looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, and Senator McKeon, and I hope I am pronouncing that correctly, Troy.
It's actually McEwen, sir.
McEwen.
Chairman.
I apologize.
No
And I
worries.
really actually practiced that, so I'm glad you clarified.
I'm Senator Troy McEwen in Senate District 24. My area is one of the smaller areas. It's pretty much most of Gillette, the town itself, and that's it. Retired out of the Army after 27 years. Bought a couple grocery stores in the county. Been doing that for about 13 years and got approached to run. I think the constituents were looking for something a little more conservative. And so I signed up and here I am.
Well, welcome aboard, Senator. It's good to have you here. That's an important part of Wyoming that you represent, and glad to have you on board. Senator Pappas.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Stephan Pappas. I'm from Senate District 7, which is basically the southeast part of Cheyenne and parts of Laramie County, a little bit of Laramie County. It's a pretty small district, only 7 square miles. So I think it's the second smallest district in the state. I did nearly 24 years in the U.S. Air Force, all in the Wyoming Air National Guard, where I retired as the Assistant ATAG, Assistant Adjutant General for Air. Also, at the same time, running my own business, Pappas and Pappas Architects, which I'll have to tell you all that I actually dissolved the business December 31st. I turned 70 in December, and I thought it was time to retire. So now maybe I can spend a little more time doing legislative duties. So new chapter in my life, and looking to work with you all on transportation. I think it's an important committee, both for our transportation needs in the state and our military affairs and our veterans. So happy to join you all in this endeavor.
Mr. Vice Chairman, thank you. And as a former desk mate, it's good to be back on the same committee with you, and really look forward to working with you. And you bring such a great knowledge of our military affairs with you. I agree with you. That's a very important part of what we're going to be up to the next 2 years. Well, I'm Bill Landon, the new chairman of transportation, and very happy to be serving in that role. The last 2 years, I served as chairman of the Corporations and Elections Committee, and actually served alongside Senator Furphy. So it's good to bring Senator Furphy over here with me, and glad to have all of you guys on with me. I represent Senate District 27, which is the east side of Natrona County. It includes some of the bigger houses in our community, and it includes the community of Evansville, where our state veteran cemetery is located. And if you've never been to the cemetery, I would commend that to you. You go through the little community of Evansville, and sneak right up on the Hill, and all of the work that's been done by the Wyoming legislature in my 15 years in the state Senate has really turned that into a magnificent facility. And so hopefully one of these days, if you haven't seen it, you'll have an opportunity to swing by. This, as I mentioned, is my 15th year that I'm going into in the state Senate. It's been quite an honor and a privilege, and I agree with the vice chairman. I think this is a very important committee that we serve on. Our infrastructure and our highways and roads really say a lot about our ability to conduct commerce and to get our workers to work sites. On any given Friday night, there's 180 buses out there taking our young people to high schools across the state. So we could go on and on about how important our infrastructure is. And that's part of the lift that we're going to be asked to undertake. Under a new administration, we'll see what comes from the federal government, which helps us with our roads, but we have some challenges, and I look forward to meeting those with all of you. I'll send a shout out to Senator Anderson. We'll learn a little bit more about him in the next meeting, hopefully, but hope he continues to get better, and I hope that we'll get to see him next week. So with that, I will go back to that question, Katie, that do we have anyone here who would like to give us the background on the Selective Service Registration SF-12?
Mr. Chairman, I'll be bringing in Director Reiner and Taylor Rossetti.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rossetti, good morning. I can see you, and now I can see the fine director. Director Reiner, good morning. Great to see you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. Hey, just maybe a couple things before we get going here, Chairman. Certainly, welcome back. Full circles are very cool. And for all of the other members, good to see you and good to meet you. Certainly, thank you for your service in the military in the past and on this committee and on the legislature for the state of Wyoming, because it's never lost on us that it's not a full-time job and that you all have other things going on in your life. And as I watch the commitment and dedication and perseverance that each one of you has, it means a lot to us. I would agree with you, Chairman, that this is a very important committee. Certainly been with you for about the last 10 years here in various components and aspects. So, Mr. Chairman, regarding this bill, certainly was not a bill that we brought. It is a bill that we would support. Since there's nobody here from the Selective Service, we would be happy to walk the committee through the bill and the concepts.
So Director Reiner, thank you very much for that. And thanks for the very kind comments. I'm excited about our committee as well and look forward to working with you. So Director Reiner, if you would, just for formality's sake, if you would introduce yourself and then walk us into and through Senate File 12, I think that would really help us to get up to speed.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. For the record, my name is Luke Reiner, and I'm the director of WYDOT. With me is Mr. Taylor Rossetti, who is the head of our services department. And really what I'd like to do, I think just opening comments would say that from the WYDOT perspective, everything in this bill is supportable. And certainly with my military background, would certainly support the concept of ensuring that our members throughout the state are registered, our young men are registered as they should be. But to walk us through the bill, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to turn the microphone over to Mr. Rossetti.
Thank you very much, Director. And Mr. Rossetti, take it away.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for having me this morning. Taylor Rossetti, YDOT Support Services Administrator. In front of you is Senate File 12. As the director mentioned, this is about selective service registration and tying that process to the driver's license and identification card issuance process that YDOT has. At the front, the first page of the bill, starting there on line 10, is section 1, and we're creating a new part to chapter 7, which is driver's licenses in Title 31 of the Wyoming Code. Starting there on line 14, page 1, and going over to line 5 on page 2, it's really just outlining that upon passage of this bill, it gives us the authority to transmit information to the Selective Service Administration. And then if you see there, one of the important things there is there on line 5, which is the actual federal reference to the requirement for selective service. Again, that requirement is for men 18 to 25 years of age to register with selective service. This makes them eligible for federal student aid, federal jobs, and other additional things than that. This isn't instituting the draft or anything like that. That's an act of Congress. This is simply passing information to the Selective Service Administration so that they can abide by the federal requirement that individuals between 18 and 25 register for that service. Moving on then, there on page 2, at lines 7 through 13, really just talks about the certification that would be added to our applications for driver's license and identification cards. So what that is when you go and apply for those items, it's going to say right up front that by signing those forms, you're agreeing to let that information be passed for the purposes of selective service registration. Moving then on to lines 15 through 19. Again, that's just basically allowing us to pass that information on once the applications have been signed. Moving on to lines 21 through 23 there at the bottom of page 2, that's just simply saying that the information that we pass will not be done in violation of the Federal Driver's License Privacy Protection Act. So it just means that whatever means that we do this through, we'll have to have the appropriate security in place so that the information is guarded on both our side as well as the Selective Service Administration side. Moving over then to page 3, this is where we start modifying some existing language just to accommodate this bill if it were to pass. Moving on to lines 5 through 10, that's just the part of statute that explains what is contained in our application for driver's license. On line 10, we're just simply adding this new section that was created beginning on page 1. So that's just saying that our application would have a space to certify that you're allowing for selective service administration. Moving then on to lines 12 through 23, that's just pulling in the identification card, which is just a separate application from a driver's license. The change here, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, is actually there on page 4 on lines 1 and 2. And again, this is simply adding the certification to collect the information needed in the event that a person's only applying for an identification card rather than a driver's license. So you can apply for one or the other. This bill would allow for selective service registration to be conducted through either process. With that, then the effective date of that bill is there on line 13, page 4. It's anticipated as written to go into effect July 1, 2021. With that, I'd stand for any questions you may have, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Mr. Rossetti, well done. Thank you. Committee questions for Mr. Rossetti? Any questions? Senator Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I'm very much in favor of this bill, but let me make it clear for those who might object. It is clearly, the way I understand it, an opt-in. So if you don't sign the certification, that means you're not registering with the selective service. I just want to confirm that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Rossetti, I had the same question, and it's related to Senator Furphy's, which is, can you decide not to sign the certification form?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Furphy, it's a good question. There was an awful lot of discussion along those lines in committee. As written here, the interpretation of the way we're reading page 2, lines 7 through 13, which is really that certification, is we're reading that not as an opt-in or an opt-out. We're reading that more of as an all or nothing. If you're going to apply for the driver's license and you meet those requirements, by signing that application, you can get a driver's license and we'll also register you. So that was the conversation that we had during the interim session. And I believe that was the policy decision that the committee made.
So follow up, Senator Furphy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I didn't interpret it that way, but I'm glad for the clarification. Thank you.
So Senator Pappas.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, just a little background on what the committee did. We discussed this at length in earlier committee meetings, and the issue there is it's mandatory by federal law that people in this age group register. So it's not like we're actually doing them a favor. It's helping these folks that a lot of them don't understand that if they do not register, they're in violation of the law, and a lot of times it's come back to bite them in future years when they try to take out a student loan or do some of these things that they're not eligible for if they don't register. So they're required to register anyhow. This just makes the process very seamless, because quite frankly, unlike the days when I had to register during the Vietnam conflict, everybody was really cognizant of the selective service registration. It was a big thing. Well, today, half the students don't even understand that they have to do it. So I really think this is a good way to protect those folks who otherwise might not know that they have to comply with federal law.
Thank you, Senator. That's helpful. Really appreciate it, and appreciate it, Mr. Rossetti, you clarifying that that you need to sign it if you want to get your driver's license that day. So, Director Reiner.
Mr. Chairman, perhaps to add a little bit to the discussion after, as I sat through the interim and listened to it, because it was actually a fascinating sort of debate, is one of the examples that they used that was actually helpful for me was sometimes registrations do get lost, and the ramifications of not registering are a lifetime. And if you fail to register, I think it's by the age of 26, I mean, you never qualify for certain federal benefits, and it's irrevocable. And there have been cases where states who have implemented what this legislation does, where an individual would go and try to get a benefit at some point in life and said, well, you didn't register. And however, if the state had in place that we would submit information with the driver's license, you are deemed by circumstance to be registered. And so in this case, where actually the young man in this case that had fallen through the cracks, really the VA went back and said, you know what, or not the VA, the Selective Service, we know that the law was in place, and we know if something wrong happened, and you are deemed registered and you're okay. And so that was actually a way to really sort of be a backstop for information. And as Senator Pappas said, this is federal law, and so this is in support of the federal law as I read and think about this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So Director Reiner, nothing about our collection of this information that would join other information collected on your driver's license is going to change how protected that information is, correct?
Mr. Chairman, that's exactly correct. The information is the information, and what happens is it's packaged up and sent up to the Selective Service.
Further questions, committee? Anything else for Mr. Hand up? But we already have Mr. Daniels and Mr. Aguirre. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Mr. Daniels, why don't you take it away and we'll have Mr. Aguirre on deck. Good morning. Thanks for being here.
Good morning, Chairman, and good morning, Senators. Welcome to another legislative session. I wish you the best of luck moving forward. My name is Jacob Daniels. I'm from the Selective Service System out here in Washington, D.C. metro area. And Mr. Aguirre, who's also in the meeting, he's our Wyoming State Director. And so this legislation in front of you was a lot of developments of back and forth between our lawyers and the lawyers for the Wyoming legislature. Everybody worked well together. We went through the committee process, the joint committee over the summer, in the fall, and came to a conclusion on this type of legislation. Mr. Rossetti did a great job of explaining what this bill does. But basically, right now, in calendar year 2019, we're still working on 2020 statistics. But in 2019, 37% of Wyoming 18-year-olds were not registered with Selective Service. And federal law requires that you register for Selective Service within 30 days of your 18th birthday. Although there's a grace period in the law, as was stated by, I think, Director Reiner, that you can register with Selective Service up until you turn age 26. But at that point, once you're 26, it's too late. You can't register and you miss out on a lot of benefits. And so we have this sort of legislation connecting driver's licenses and identification cards to Selective Service registration in 42 U.S. states, Washington, D.C., and all 5 U.S. territories. And the reason why this is good for your constituents in Wyoming, as was already stated by, I think, Mr. Reiner and Mr. Rossetti, is that registration with Selective Service is necessary to remain eligible for employment with the federal government. That also includes employment with the majority of state and local governments. Citizenship, if you were required to register but failed to register, there's a 5-year delay in citizenship proceedings. Financial aid at the federal level, you must have registered with Selective Service in order to receive federal student aid, Pell Grants, loans. Also, 34 U.S. states require that, that you register with Selective Service in order to get state-based financial aid. And then also federal job training. Let's say you get hurt on the job, you're in your mid-40s, you hurt your back, you got to go back to some sort of rehabilitation training for a new type of career. If that's federally funded through the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, that requires Selective Service registration. And if you didn't do that before you turn 26, you don't get that benefit, all those benefits. So that's the number one reason why it's important for your constituents, because it streamlines the registration process. But secondly, maybe more important, is that if we have another draft, and we all know that hopefully we don't have a draft, but it's possible that in order for a draft to be fair, we have to have the highest registration rate possible. And so that's where that 37% of 18-year-olds in Wyoming in 2019 who didn't register kind of jumps out at me. Because for every man who fails to follow the law and uphold their civic obligation to register with Selective Service, it makes it more likely that somebody who followed the law and registered will be drafted in the event that we have military conscription. And so we think this is great legislation. We're happy to answer any of your questions. Again, I am grateful to the good folks, professional staff that have worked with me back and forth on getting this bill put together the way we wanted it, to make both sides happy, to comply with Wyoming law and also with federal law. And Mr. Rossetti has been ultra helpful in this entire process. And so we really appreciate the hospitality that Wyoming has shown us.
Well, Mr. Daniels, thank you for being here, representing our Selective Service. And I've already learned a great deal from you this morning. So Really appreciate it. Committee, any questions for Mr. Daniels? Senator Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just curious, what do you do to notify 18-year-olds that they need to sign up for this? Obviously, that word's not getting out very well because of the low participation. Just curious what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. That's a great question. And we use a variety of methods. We reach out through, for example, we had the Secretary of Education sign off on a letter to high school principals a couple of years back to try to get that back into the schools, to remind students of the importance of registering with Selective Service. We have some public service advertisements. We have a strong presence on social media. We have this driver's license legislation in 42 US states. The FAFSA has the option to register with Selective Service when you're going through the free application for federal student aid. And then also what we do is we try to get the information on those who have not registered, but were required to register under federal law. And we do that in coordination with the Department of Education, Social Security Administration, state departments of transportation, to figure out who has not registered. And what we'll do is, if they haven't registered within 6 months of their 18th birthday, we'll send them a registration reminder letter in the mail. And if we don't hear back after that first letter, we'll send another registration reminder letter in the mail. And so we do our very best to with our minimal budget, we do our best to reach out and to raise awareness of Selective Service registration. I think Senator Pappas really touched on it, that the further we get away from Vietnam, the further we get away from people having to be involved and really cognizant of the draft, the more it just kind of goes away, and it's not taught in schools the way it used to be, and it's not something thankfully that isn't as prevalent in daily life as it once was. And so when we pass legislation like this legislation that we're talking about, Senate File 12, in Texas or other states, our registration rates for 18-year-olds goes up to about 100%, or maybe even higher, depending on the census count and how we factor that all in. And so this legislation is a good way to make sure that 18-year-olds know about the registration requirement.
So further questions, committee? So Mr. Daniels, I've got one, just as a curiosity. You mentioned that that males must register for the draft. Do females have to register as well? Where do we stand on that, given our military situation these days?
Great question, Mr. Chairman. And that's something that we're currently litigating right now. Previously, in 1981, the Supreme Court held that male-only registration was in fact constitutional, because at that point in 1981, women were not permitted to serve in combat. Now that's changed. I think it changed in about 2013, 14. Women were permitted to serve in combat. And so that has kind of changed the calculus. And so the Selective Service system is in litigation with women's groups who are advocating for women to be required to register, and also with men's groups who are advocating that it's not fair that they have to register, but women aren't required to register. And so actually the National Coalition for Men and the ACLU have petitioned the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will be hearing that issue here probably in this upcoming term. And so we'll have some clarification regarding whether women are required to register, or if it's going to stay the same that it currently is. And so that's why the way this legislation is drafted, and again, the professional staff did a great job of working with us, is it says, if required under federal law to register. So instead of saying men, it says, if the Military Selective Service Act says that you're required to register with Selective Service. And so in the event that women are in fact required to register, there's going to be a big curve of trying to get that information out there and to educate people that they have to register. And so that this sort of legislation, will really help plug that gap, because again, communicating this with all the other stuff going on in the world can be very difficult.
Mr. Daniels, appreciate you highlighting that language for us, and that information is very useful. Thank you for that. Senator Pappas.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question. We do have, should women be required in the future to register? I don't believe that we need to change anything in this piece of legislation. I believe on page 2, lines 4 and 5, where we're actually tying the applicant, they'll have to comply with the Federal Selective Service Act. So when things change federally, I think we automatically, by tying to that act, I don't think we have to change anything here in Wyoming's law. Am I correct? Can someone help me with there?
Mr. Daniels? Okay, Mr. Daniels has frozen up for just a moment, but I do.
Yes, sir. 18 to.
Okay.
Sorry.
And that's very helpful, Senator Pappas and Mr. Daniels, because that means we're not going to have to go back in 2 years and change this legislation. Appreciate you pointing that out. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Daniels. If you're willing to hang on in case we have another question down the road, but I do want to get to Mr. Aguirre, who has joined us this morning. Mr. Aguirre, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for giving us the opportunity to talk to the committee today. I am the Wyoming Director of Selective Service, a resident of Campbell County, Gillette. So been here for about 10 years. It's really, really a tough act to follow. Taylor Rossetti, Director Reiner, and obviously Jacob Daniels. There isn't a whole lot I can add to this. I did send in some of the materials that we provided at the November committee meeting for those of you that didn't get a chance to see that. So there isn't a lot other than that. I think this is a good thing for Wyoming. And what concerns me the most about this, there's a lot of, everybody thinks when you register for selective service, it's a draft. And I think Jacob mentioned that earlier. It's not the draft. And even if eventually females have to register for that, it's still, they're not registering for the draft. But the key thing to remember is when they do, if we do have a draft, we want to make sure it's fair, and we want to make sure that one group who did register and followed the law isn't disenfranchising over those that didn't follow the law. So it's a fairness thing. I think it's a good thing for our Wyoming residents, our young people there. We want to make sure that they don't get missed. Senator Pappas mentioned that and gave us that example that we used back in November. That is perfect. It is the thing, because sometimes our youth tend to get moving, and if it's not right there in front of them, there's so much going on in our nation that they miss it. So I would highly encourage your support and ask that. I think this is a good thing for Wyoming. We are sort of lagging behind the rest of the nation on this thing with the number of states. I think there's only 8 states in the entire nation that don't have driver's license legislation that do this. So I think it's a good for us. We need to catch up, and we want to make sure none of our youth get missed. And that's the primary concern here. Again, I can't add any other information that Jacob has added. I think Director Reiner and Taylor Rossetti did an awesome job in tweaking and assisting with the LSO on changing and revising that, getting that bill where we need to have it. So thank you again very much for your support. I was a draftee. I was drafted in '66, so I spent 27 years plus in the military, so all active. So I'm a part of this, and it works. And I don't regret any of it. I loved every bit of my military service. So but thank you for your time.
So committee, any questions for the Director of Selective Service in the state of Wyoming, Mr. Aguirre? Any questions? Well, Mr. Aguirre, it's good to know that you're up there in Campbell County where you can keep an eye on those senators and representatives from up there. That's important work. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, to Chris Smith. Mr. Smith, good morning. Thanks for being here.
Good morning, Chairman Landon. It's good to see you and all the members of the committee. I am Chris Smith, the now senior counsel for the Wyoming Military Department. Many of you know me when I was Colonel Smith, taking off the uniform, trying to figure out how to dress every morning, and I'm making do. I just wanted to be really quick. It was already covered some of the things that I think are important in this bill. As a father of 3 daughters, when we went through the FAFSA, the student loan, the grants, they always ask that question. And I will say just anecdotally, I did help one of our military members' kids who tried to go back to school somewhere in the early 20s and realized he had never registered. Took a little bit of effort to straighten all that up, but it really does have
So, Mr. Smith, you froze up there for a moment. We're going to see if we can get you back. In the meantime, I'm going to check with Amanda. Do we have anybody else in waiting, Amanda? And if so, they would follow.
Chairman Landon, right now, we don't have anyone else raising their hand to testify.
I don't see anybody either. So thank you for that, Amanda. And Mr. Smith, Colonel, it is a little different not to see you in your uniform, but we'll sure let you back in if we can get you back in. If not, we're going to go ahead and move on. Really appreciate you being here. Are you back with us? Okay. If you can unmute, there you go.
There you go. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'll just leave it at that I think this is a great idea, and it will help people at a time when 18 to 25-year-olds have trouble knowing the great consequences that not registering, and doing it automatically seems like a great thing. And I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I do think this, thinking of the 2 boys that I raised, I think it is going to be very, very helpful for our young people. And committee, anything else for our visitors this morning? Really appreciate it. Senator Pappas, go ahead.
Nothing else. I would just like to move the bill.
Well, we're going to go right to that. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here this morning. I was going to ask what the vice chairman already did, which is for a motion on the bill. It's been moved. I'm not going to call for seconds on the committee, but we need one when we deal with a bill. So do I have a second? Seconded by Senator Furphy. Let's take a look at the bill, gentlemen. Any proposed amendments? I'm not going to go page by page, but any further comments or questions or any amendments to the bill? Okay. Question on the bill. Amanda, would you please call roll on Senate File 12?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Senator Furphy.
Aye.
Senator McEwen.
Aye.
Senator Pappas.
Aye.
And Chairman Landon.
Aye. Senator Pappas, would you be willing to present this on the floor for us?
Sure will. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Senate File 12, we'll move on to the session. Let's go to Senate File 11, Committee, Highway Safety Seatbelts. And I think we do have some folks here this morning who want to visit with us about this bill. And Amanda, if it looks like the director can come back in. We have some folks at the national level this morning. And we have Mr. Holler with it. So welcome back, Director Reiner. Good to see you again. Can you give us some thoughts on Senate File 11?
Mr. Chairman, I would be happy to do so. For the record, again, Luke Reiner, Director of YDOT. Mr. Chairman, I'm joined today with Colonel Haller, the Colonel of the Highway Patrol. What I would propose is that I give a little bit of background, walk you through the bill, kick it over to Colonel Haller for a few comments, and then sort of have questions and comments from the committee to YDOT, if you're okay with that format.
Thank you, Director, and it's good to see the Colonel on this morning, and we have some good folks following him. We'll get to them after the Colonel, so take it away, Director.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So really for the members of the committee here, this was an interim topic this year, and it was certainly part of the interim topic on improving the safety on our roads. And you will see multiple bills through this session that really came out of that interim topic. Several on seat belts, certainly the autonomous or automated ticketing system is again part of that safety system or safety review. But here's the talking points on safety and seat belts from the director standpoint, and I know we'll hear more details as we go through. But one of the interesting things about being in this position, which has been about the last 2 years, is I do see every accident report, every fatality report that happens in this state. And it just breaks your heart to see the number that involved individuals who are not wearing seatbelts. And in 2019, 147 fatalities on our roads, almost a record, not quite, not a record we want to surpass. 58 of those, or 39%, were not wearing seatbelts. One was an unrestrained child. What was interesting about those numbers, though, is that Wyoming residents accounted for about 62% of those fatalities, while the remaining, 38% were non-residents. And that really, those numbers depict the trend that we see, that historically Wyoming residents are 2 to 3 times more likely to be unrestrained and killed in a crash than non-residents, because typically non-residents come from a state where seatbelt law is required and they're wearing their seatbelts, and when they get into an accident are less likely to be killed. Because there's certainly no doubt the statistics show that a primary seatbelt law has proven to reduce fatalities. National seatbelt use is about 91%, 90.7, I think is the exact number. Our seatbelt use in Wyoming is significantly lower, and actually it dropped in percentage of use last year. The stats have shown that if you pass a primary seatbelt law, about you see about a 12% increase in people who actually follow the law. So based on the stats and based on the testimony of multiple entities through the interim committee did vote to push forward a primary seatbelt law. And the key talking points on that is that really it increases the penalties and fines significantly. Really, in the case of a driver, from $25 to no more than $100. For a minor passenger, which the driver would be responsible for, from $25 to no more than $200. And for a passenger non-compliance, from a $15 fine to no more than $100. And then the other thing that it added was that any person who violates this section of law must complete a safe and defensive driving education course. And so that was the teeth that the interim committee put into the proposed legislation to say, hey, we are concerned about your safety and want to help enforce it. And then the other item that was repealed was a line that said you cannot be pulled over primarily or singularly because you are not wearing a seatbelt. So with that in mind, committee, if you flip open to the bill, I'll just walk you quickly through it. it's actually pretty simple. If you flip over to page 2, really what you see on lines 8 through 11 and lines 14 through 16 is the increase in fines that I discussed earlier in terms of the fine increase and putting teeth behind the law, and which includes both of the increase in fines and the requirement to complete a safe and defensive driving education course. And then on line 18, what you see, section 2, Wyoming Statute 315-1402 Delta is repealed, and the verbiage in that line that was repealed is no motor vehicles shall be halted solely for a violation of this section. And so that's what changes this from a secondary offense to a primary seatbelt law. With that, Mr. Chairman, that would be a summary from me. I'd like to kick it over to Colonel Haller for any comments he might have from the Highway Patrol perspective, and to certainly stand for questions.
Thank you, Director Reiner. Before we go to the Colonel committee, any questions for Director Reiner at this point? Senator McEwen.
Thank you, Chairman. Director Reiner. I'm wondering if we know what the stats of the people who drive on the highways, i.e. how many are in-state versus out-of-state vehicles. It seems to me to say 62 to 38%, while it might be a valid number, maybe 80% of everybody who drives on a Wyoming interstate or highway is a resident. So I was just curious what those stats were.
Director Reiner?
Mr. Chairman, Senator McEwen, we do know those, and this is rough. So about in terms of passenger vehicles, about 15% are from out of state, and 75%, correction, 85% are in state. On the commercial truck traffic, it flips, and about 65% of truck traffic is from out of state, and the rest are from in-state. The percentages, Senator, that I talked about, there would be percentages of those killed in accidents. So from the standpoint of I think statistics, I see your point. Although what you look at is of the accidents, and you just take all the accidents and look at what percentage were killed and then where they were from. So, but I hear your point on the stats. Thank you.
Follow up on that, Senator McKeon.
Chairman, Director Reiner, I just want to make a point that if we have a 68% death or 62% death rate of Wyoming residents out of 85% of the traffic, I think it's a false assumption to assume people in Wyoming aren't wearing seatbelts or wearing them less than anywhere else. And that was my only point. And I appreciate your clarification. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Senator. Colonel Haller, we're going to go to you, sir, and welcome. Thanks for being here this morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Kevin Haller. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. Just to follow up a little bit on what Director Reiner relayed. He provided some statistics from 2019. I would like to freshen that a little bit from just this past calendar year in 2020. Very similar. Unfortunately, we did have 128 fatalities on our roadways during calendar year 2020. Of those, there were 53 of those fatalities who were not wearing their seatbelt, or approximately 41%. Of those were Wyoming residents. There were 38, or 72%. Non-Wyoming residents that were killed were approximately 15, or 28% of that 53. Again, whenever we start looking at, there's an analysis done of those that are wearing seatbelts, and it is specific to Wyoming residents, conducted by our Highway Safety Office here at WYDOT. And what they learned is that in 2018, when this study was performed, there were 86.3% of Wyoming citizens that were actually buckled in. However, in 2019, when that same study was performed for Wyoming residents, it had dropped 8% down to 78.3. Now, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration has done research for years, and they look at seatbelt use on a national level. And what they find is that those states that have a primary seatbelt law, their use goes up to an average of about 90.7%. So if you round that up, about 91%. In addition, Director Reiner did hit on whenever NHTSA has seen states implement primary seatbelt laws, they do see an increase on average of about 12%. So my concern is our numbers are going the wrong way. We have more and more vehicles that are built more safely. Occupant restraints are readily available. The airbags, there are so many other safety factors. Now, the number one cause of a fatality in Wyoming, particular to the type of crash, are rollovers, specific to rollovers when an individual is not restrained. And typically that does result in an ejection. Occupants, drivers are much more safe if they are restrained and are secured inside the vehicle and are not thrown from the vehicle, which most often occurs in a fatality. With that, have taken a look at some of these states and what types of seatbelt laws they have. This come up in a prior interim committee. 25 states in the United States of America have primary enforcement seatbelt laws. When we look at primary enforcement for front seat only, there are approximately 10 states, but I'd be happy to follow up with this information to the committee should you wish for it. Having said that, Mr. Chairman, and to Senator McEwen's point, I readily acknowledge and accept there are individuals, drivers and passengers, that die in vehicle crashes restrained. There is no question. We do see that. However, there is strong evidence to indicate that the more people that are wearing seatbelts, the more people's lives that will be spared. Whenever we talk about rollovers and the potential of an ejection, when we talk about running into fixed objects or multiple vehicles with head-ons, having that restraint on and not colliding with the steering wheel and causing internal damage, being ejected from a vehicle, increases your chances of surviving that particular crash. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for questions.
Well, any questions for Colonel Hallett? Colonel, I guess I've got one. Sitting here wondering, and this might be for the director too. I think often about your folks who are out there in the grimmest of circumstances. Some nights that you wouldn't want to be outside your front door, let alone out on the highway somewhere. So I do think about the impact to our highway patrol. But further than that, what impact is it on me if my neighbor is out there driving without a seatbelt? What are the potential impacts to everybody else? I mean, why is it that we really should care about whether or not our neighbor is wearing that seatbelt?
Mr. Chairman, that is a great question. It's also a complex question. First, if I may address it from the law enforcement, specifically the trooper perspective. This is very much a mental health issue for law enforcement who are through these what we would call crime scenes, gathering the evidence and seeing tragedy and death. In addition to that, it is not uncommon when I talk to troopers from throughout the state, when they are investigating a fatality, they know the numbers, they know the percentages, they know that most likely before they have even identified that particular individual in a fatality, that they are most likely a Wyoming resident. particularly if it's been a rollover and they've been ejected. So we look at it as one of our own Wyoming residents that has been killed in that. We do have a robust mental health system. We want our folks to not only be physically fit, but also mentally fit. As you might imagine, some take advantage of that program more than others, but it is available there for them. Whenever we talk about your neighbor and whether or not they are wearing a seatbelt and maintaining safety, I'd like to approach that from two different perspectives. The first one is from a neighbor aspect. Those individuals are potentially cause fatalities and crashes and injuries are very expensive. We all know medical bills and everything that occurs as a result. And oftentimes the state, whether it be state funds or federal funds, ends up picking up some of those expenses. Beyond that, if you have an individual that, let's say, is a occupant in a vehicle with you, and you are restrained and they are not restrained, that person is now a flying object. And we have a lot of serious injuries and or fatalities that occur as a result of unrestrained individuals that are colliding in to others, whether they are restrained or not, because of the force, momentum, the G-force that occurs. And it creates a lot of devastating tragedy.
Colonel, thank you. That was a tough question for a really tough topic. And appreciated your words on behalf of the troopers out there who have to go and investigate these situations. Director Reiner, did you have any comment on that regard, or?
Mr. Chairman, I would. I appreciate the question. I think Colonel Haller answered it exceptionally well. Probably two other comments. Not besides our troopers, we do see the same thing on our maintainers and our snowplow operators. So oftentimes they will be the first to a scene, and so we pay attention to their mental health as well. Obviously, the troopers are significantly more involved, but we do see it on the maintainer side. I think Colonel Haller's point is exactly right about restrained and unrestrained people in a vehicle. We know it's more likely that you can retain control of a vehicle if you're restrained and you stay behind the wheel as you go off the road and as you hit bumps. And so not only does that help perhaps save your own life, but the lives of others that are in the vehicle with you if you stay behind the wheel and in control of the vehicle. And I would leave it at that, Mr. Chairman.
Hey, committee, anything for these gentlemen before we move on to Ms. Gill and Ms. Shaw, who have been waiting patiently? Okay, thank you, gentlemen. If you don't mind sticking around this morning, we may come back to you. Ms. Gill, welcome to Senate Transportation for the state of Wyoming. It's good to have you here this morning.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to you and to the committee members. My name is Tara Gill, and I'm the Senior Director of Advocacy and State Legislation for Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety. Advocates is a nonprofit organization that works in all 50 states and Washington, D.C. to support proven policy to advance its mission of safe occupants and road users, safe vehicles, and safe roads. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify in support of Senate File 11. This legislation will simplify the enforcement of Wyoming's seatbelt law by upgrading it to primary enforcement, better deter motorists from taking a trip without wearing their seatbelt, and save lives. We've submitted a longer, more detailed written statement with Wyoming Public Health Association, Safe Kids Laramie County, and kidsandcars.org. So I'll be brief in my remarks. And the data that I'll be sharing today is from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA, unless otherwise noted. So buckling up is one of the most effective protections for you and your family in all types of crashes. whether it be frontal, side, or rear impact, and against common crash factors such as speeding, impaired driving, or distracted driving. Lack of seatbelt use is a major contributor to highway deaths and injuries in Wyoming. In 2019, according to NHTSA data, nearly half of those killed in motor vehicle crashes were unbelted when restraint use was known. The state's seatbelt use rate plummeted in 2019 to just over 78%, marking it as one of the 3 lowest states in the country for seatbelt use that year. The good news is that we have research-based common sense solutions to reducing these tragic deaths and mitigating injuries. Enactment of a primary enforcement seatbelt law covering all passengers is a very effective strategy. In fact, national research has found that if every state with a secondary seatbelt law upgraded to primary enforcement, about 1,000 lives and $4 billion in crash costs could be saved every year. These are significant savings in lives and dollars. In 2019, traffic fatalities spiked 32% in Wyoming. Additionally, preliminary reports show the national traffic fatality rate rose in 2020, as did traffic fatalities in many states. The increase is, at least in part, a result of a trend seen during the COVID-19 pandemic of more speeding and impaired driving and a decrease in seatbelt use. Now is the time to take action to improve the state's seatbelt law and better protect Wyoming families and visitors. We urge you to advance Senate File 11, a research-proven countermeasure to close a dangerous deficit in Wyoming's seatbelt requirement. Thank you very much. And I just wanted to add that my husband's family hails from Buffalo, Wyoming. So I have an interest in this legislation in both a personal and a professional capacity. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ms. Gill, for being here this morning, and thanks for sharing that information about our good friends up in Buffalo. Keep an eye out for them, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any questions for Ms. Gill? Okay, we're going to go to Ms. Shaw, and she will be followed this morning, committee. We've got Ms. Wilkinson, Ms. Spiker, Mr. Farmer, in that order. So glad to have everyone with us to talk about this good bill. Go ahead, Ms. Shaw. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Stephanie Shaw, and I appreciate the opportunity to represent the National Transportation Safety Board this morning and to talk about our recommendations related to seatbelt use. The NTSB is an independent federal agency charged by Congress with investigating significant accidents in all modes of transportation. And based on those investigations, we make safety recommendations aimed at preventing future crashes and mitigating their consequences. As we've heard from the Colonel and Director Reiner and Ms. Gill, the benefits of safety belt use are significant and well documented. They are our best defense against motor vehicle crash related deaths and injuries. The NTSB has recommended for decades that states authorize the primary enforcement of seatbelt use laws. Based on scientific studies and our own investigations, we are confident that lives will be saved and injuries prevented in Wyoming if you approve primary enforcement of your existing seatbelt use law. We also provided a written statement with more details showing the importance of seatbelt use and primary enforcement, and we appreciate your consideration of this important safety measure, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Ms. Shaw. Again, really appreciate you representing the NTSB this morning. Questions, committee? Thank you so much. Let's go to, let's see if we can let Ms. Wilkinson in and Ms. Spiker, and that'll be followed by Mr. Farmer, Ms. Furch, and Mr. Hamilton in that order. Catherine, good morning. Nice to see you this morning. Ms. Wilkinson, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Catherine Wilkinson. I'm here today to represent American Property and Casualty Insurance Association, speaking in support of Senate File 11. Anything that can improve safety on roads, we stand in support of, and seatbelts save lives. Mr. Chairman, on a personal note, I would like to add that I thought I was going to be testifying to you all this morning, safely pulled off on the side of the road due to a terrible accident that happened when I was en route to my computer. And I had just learned that a family member narrowly escaped that accident. So speaking also from a personal level, they do save lives, and I would urge you to consider supporting this bill. Mr. Chairman, with that, I would stand for any questions.
So committee, anything for Ms. Wilkinson this morning? Thank you very much, Catherine, for being here this morning. Appreciate it. Okay, Ms. Spiker, welcome. Good morning. Glad to have you in Senate Transportation this morning. Take it away.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Amy Speaker, and I'm a board member of the Wyoming Public Health Association. We provide education on public health in Wyoming for the public and hold conferences and training for public health practitioners. And we try to provide information to you all as decision makers as you make these tough decisions. I was first drawn to public health because of its emphasis on prevention for entire communities, not just individuals, and the incredible decrease in fatalities from motor vehicle crashes over the last 50 years has been a great example of public health in action. Safer cars, safer roads, and safer drivers have propelled this decrease. Unfortunately, there are still far too many preventable crashes here in Wyoming. Just this past weekend, when I was reading the paper, I saw the story of 2 young people killed on Happy Jack Road right outside of Cheyenne here due to a crash. Neither were wearing their seatbelt. Wyoming ranked 4th in the nation for motor vehicle fatalities by population, and WYDOT, as was mentioned before, reported between 2015 and 2019 that 59% of those that were killed were not properly using a seatbelt. Primary seatbelt laws, such as as proposed here, have been shown to increase the use of seatbelts, as has been said, about 12%, which would result in Wyoming in almost 50 or over 50,000 more people wearing seatbelts and being protected by their in case of a crash. In addition to the general public, transportation is really important for occupational health and safety, another place where unfortunately Wyoming often leads the nation in fatalities. 53% of our occupational fatalities are related to transportation, and passage of a primary seatbelt law would also impact the safety of our workers. So I hope you consider taking action that contributes to the culture of safety in our state. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Amy, thank you. And I apologize for mispronouncing your last name. It is Speaker. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's a 50-50 guess, so you're good.
Thank you so much for clarifying. And committee, anything for Amy this morning? Senator McEwen.
Chairman, I'd just like clarification. I'm pretty sure Colonel Howler just quoted the fatality numbers, and the ones without seatbelts were actually 36%. So I'm not sure where we're getting the 53% that the last 3 people have spoken about. Thank you, sir.
So absolutely, Senator Amy, I think that was in relation to occupational accidents that you quoted the 53. Do I have that note down correctly?
Mr. Chairman, yes, that is correct. The 53% of occupational fatalities were related to transportation. And if I may further clarify, I quoted a number that was the average of 2015 through 2019 for the overall deaths for seatbelt use, whereas I think Mr. Reiner quoted just the 2019 number. So I think that number has actually come down over the last several years. So it's a little bit lower if you look just at 2019.
Thank you for that clarification, Ms. Speaker. Any follow-up, Senator?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the clarification. It appears that we are getting safer without the law. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Amy, thanks for being here this morning. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Let's go now to Mr. Farmer.
Hi, good morning. I'm Chuck Farmer, Vice President of Research at the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. We're a nonprofit research and communications organization that identifies ways to reduce deaths, injuries, and property damage from crashes on our nation's roads. We're supported by auto insurers. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to present our research on the role of primary enforcement of safety belt use laws in increasing belt use and reducing fatalities. Some of the stats have already been given. Safety belts reduce the risk of death by about 45% and the risk of serious injury by about half. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration estimates that in 2017, safety belts saved the lives of about 15,000 people, but an additional 2,500 could have been saved if everybody had been wearing their safety belts. Safety belt use rates are higher in states that have primary enforcement. According to the 2019 data, use rates were about 92% in states in this country that have primary laws compared to 86% in other states. And studies have shown that switching from a secondary law to a primary law boosts use rates by, I've heard 12%. I've seen research that's 14%, but somewhere in that range is what you see an increase when you change the law from secondary to primary. What we've also seen is that, and probably due to the increased use rates, you see reductions in fatalities. Our own research that was done about 10 years ago, I believe, showed that. We compared driver fatality rates for 10 states that had changed from secondary to primary to another 14 states that during that same time period just remained at secondary. And taking into account just the other things that affect fatality rates over time, one of the big things being the economy, we found that an estimate, our best estimate of the effect of changing from primary to, or from secondary to primary was a 7% reduction in fatality rates. And so every year we go through and we figure out how many lives could be saved if the states that are still secondary change to primary. And in the latest year that we have data for, 2019, we estimate that about 239 deaths could have been prevented if the states that are still at secondary had actually had primary enforcement of their safety belt laws. So just in conclusion here, primary enforcement of safety belt laws does increase use rates and does decrease fatality rates. So if Wyoming is willing to make the change, I'm very confident that you will see a reduction in fatalities.
Mr. Farmer, thank you. Can you remind me, I didn't get it written down, who you are with again?
Oh, yeah, I'm with the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. We're based in Virginia.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Farmer, committee? I've got one. Mr. Farmer, does it affect my insurance rates when these kind of accidents occur?
It will. It's not every single one, but in general, the crash rates and the injury rates and just the cost of crashes is what affects the insurance rates in a state.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate you being here this morning. Thank you. Okay, I'm thinking that Ms. Furch was up next. Sheila, welcome. Good to see you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to appear before your committee this morning. I'm Sheila Furch, the Managing Director of the Wyoming Trucking Association. We're located in Casper. We have approximately 350 members. We represent the trucking industry in the state of Wyoming. The majority of my members actually operate commercial vehicles, from a one truck operation all the way up to international package delivery companies are members of ours. We also represent industries that serve the trucking industry, such as truck dealers, truck stops, insurance companies, that type of allied industry are also members of ours. So, Mr. Chairman, this morning, with your indulgence, I'm wearing several different hats. And the first hat I'm putting on is as the representative of the Wyoming Trucking Association. I sent you earlier this week several documents. One is a resolution that my membership revisits every year and takes a look at what's changed and what their position is as far as supporting a primary seatbelt law. Since we were unable to meet in our convention in 2020, I sent you the 2019 copy of that resolution. And my members continue to feel strongly that wearing a seatbelt is the best defense in a traffic incident, and that a seatbelt is the single most effective safety device in a vehicle at this time. We are very supportive of improving highway safety, and we feel that a primary seatbelt law will be an effort to help improve that, not only for commercial vehicles, but for passenger vehicles as well. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, in their safety regulations that apply to commercial vehicles, require seatbelt use by drivers and passengers actually. And the regulation actually reads, no driver shall operate a commercial motor vehicle, and a motor carrier shall not require or permit a driver to operate a commercial motor vehicle that has a seatbelt assembly installed at the driver's seat unless the driver is properly restrained by the seatbelt assembly. So it's a regulation for the drivers as well as the companies. Most of my members, in fact, all that I'm aware of, have company policy requiring seatbelt use, not only in the commercial vehicle, but in any company vehicle. Several years ago, when we started working with the Transportation Safety Coalition, which I'll go into a little bit more in a moment, it became very evident that Wyoming companies take this very seriously and do have company policies in place that require their employees to wear their seatbelt when they're in a company vehicle. And those policies are wonderful. However, there is also personal choice involved with those employees when they're not on the company premises. And so that's what we're dealing with when we're talking about a primary seatbelt law. It's just that added incentive for them to do what's right, to take that responsibility and wear their seatbelt. Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy right now to stop if anyone has questions about the trucking industry's perspective on seatbelt use.
Any questions, committee, for Ms. Furch? Okay, I think we're good for now. Ms. Furch, please keep going. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. The second hat I'm going to put on today is with the Transportation Safety Coalition. And the Wyoming Trucking Association has been facilitating that coalition since 2013. It was actually put together by Governor Mead. There was an effort early on in Governor Mead's administration to address workplace safety and workplace fatalities. And several industry groups were put together at that time. And the Transportation Safety Coalition has been working since that time. We address a lot of different highway safety issues, and you'll probably hear more about that throughout your tenure on this committee when other safety issues come up on the highway topic that are brought to your committee. They have identified, the Transportation Safety Coalition has also identified the importance of seatbelt use. And one of the documents that I included in my email to you earlier this week is a document that's prepared by the Department of Workforce Services titled Seatbelts and Worker Safety in Wyoming. A lot of the statistics that are listed on that document have been already talked about today, but we certainly want to change that reputation that Wyoming has for having one of the highest workplace fatality rates in the country. And transportation-related, highway-related fatalities drive a lot of that statistic for Wyoming being in the top, and that's certainly not where we want to be. So I think that this issue, the Transportation Safety Coalition, I should have said at the beginning, we have about 50 active members of that coalition, And there are different industry groups. There are different trucking companies. There are federal, state, and local safety agencies and law enforcement that are involved in that Transportation Safety Coalition. So a pretty broad base of people that are interested in improving transportation-related highway fatalities. So I think something that we're continue to work on, something that we see as a priority is the use of seatbelts. And Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to stop again while that hat's on.
Sheila, thanks for all your efforts on that front. I know that you've served and been a voice on that group. Really appreciate it. Committee, anything for Ms. Furch on that coalition? Senator McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm wondering if part of our high fatality rates isn't just seatbelt related, but if it's not the fact that everything in Wyoming is a bazillion miles away from everything. We have snow, we have ice, we have wind. I think we're missing that part of what's happening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Would you like to comment on all of that weather and distance?
Mr. Chairman, I certainly would. Senator McEwen, I agree. That's part of the issue is our weather, is highway conditions. It's the number of people that traverse Wyoming for their job. And that's certainly a part of it. But seatbelt use comes into play because there are a number of those people that are involved in those types of accidents that aren't wearing their seatbelts. So I think it's a part of it. I think it's a big part of what the Transportation Safety Coalition is taking a look at. And part of our job over these last several years has been to identify how we can better address some of the conditions that Wyoming drivers face. And certainly that's something that we will continue to address, whether it will be across I-80, whether it's on mountain passes, no matter where. And certainly that's a big picture part of what we're looking at. It's just a matter of if you're involved in an incident because of the weather or because of a traffic condition, if you're belted, your chances are better.
Okay, committee, anything else for Ms. Furch? Ms. Furch, any other comments before we?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Yes, I have at least one more hat and one more comment. I am the current chairman of the Wyoming Seatbelt Coalition. And the last 3 documents that I sent you are prepared by that coalition and talks about the primary seatbelt fact sheet. And a lot of that information has already been presented, and I certainly don't want to take your time by pointing that out again. It talks about the different statistics that have been presented to you today. The colored 2-pager is also kind of a graph that shows a lot of that information as well. Mr. Chairman, you specifically had a question, I think, that you posed to Colonel Howler and Director Reiner concerning why you should be concerned about whether your neighbor's belted up or not. And I think that goes a long ways to talk about personal responsibility and the fact that when we are using the highway system, we are a part of a bigger picture on how important it is that we're doing everything possible to make sure that our vehicle's in good condition, that we have good driving skills, and that we're taking every effort to remain safe. And I think the cost issue becomes very instrumental in understanding what some of those costs are when an accident happens. One item I did not share with you, and I'd be happy to do so if you'd like me to, is a copy of a study that WYDOT shared with me that specifically talks about what some of those costs are that when there's an accident, it's not borne just by the person that's involved in that accident. There are other costs involved, whether your insurance premiums go up, whether there's an increase in medical costs, where the taxpayer is paying for the response teams that go to an accident. And I'd be happy to share that. It's a very large study, but there's an excellent 4-page executive summary that specifically talks about some of those costs and some of the mitigation that can happen with the use of seatbelts. And Mr. Chairman, one last comment I would like to make with your indulgence. Katie Legursky, the Executive Director of the Contractors Association, was unable to join today she did ask me to mention that her association is very supportive of this piece of legislation as well.
Sheila, thank you. You did a great job of wearing 4 or 5 different hats this morning. I really appreciate it. Committee, anything else before we move on to Mr. Hamilton? Okay, let's go to Ken. And Mr. Hamilton, welcome. Good to see you this morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I'm Ken Hamilton with the Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. I appreciate being able to join you this way. Maybe just a little bit of an aside, I would like to pass along to you some further information about Senator Furphy. As you know, he's in the same town as I am, and if you do happen to be out at dark 30 in the morning, you might see Mr. Furphy jogging, which certainly does provide some inspiration, which I've been able to avoid by hanging onto my pillow for most times. But anyway, Mr. Chairman, I would like to maybe characterize my testimony a little bit as my colleague once said, the lone Wyoming fan at the CSU game, in that the Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation's members do have a policy on seatbelt usage, and they do oppose the use of a mandatory seatbelt law. And I think they all acknowledge the benefit of a seatbelt. I think most of our members do recognize that that is a very good safety device. However, I think it comes down to the issue of whether it should be a government mandated type of a thing. And that's something that you as legislators continually get asked to do, whether it's to increase the speed limit or do a statewide smoking ban or any of those things is certainly something that's in your purview. But most of our members, it not surprise you, would be fairly conservative and feel that this should still be something that the individual should be left to decide on their own. The other issue I would just raise is that there's a number of our members that do have operations next to county, state highways. And a lot of times those folks are in and out of their fields. And I know some of you may put your seatbelt on every time, but about the third time you have to take it off to jump out and open a gate. Some of our folks don't do that. And so by having a primary seatbelt law, I think you might have some impact on those folks, which doesn't probably preclude the need for those folks to necessarily wear it whenever they get onto the roads, but it does become a practical thing as the folks are in and out of their vehicles a lot to do various things along those fields. So, Mr. Chairman, I don't have any further comments. I'd be happy to answer any questions that there might be. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Mr. Hamilton, thank you. And I appreciate you alerting us to those early morning activities by the senator. I kind of subscribe to what my dad always told me. You only have so many heartbeats. Why do you want to speed them up? So anyway, really appreciate it. Good to see you this morning. Committee, anything for Mr. Hamilton? Senator Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hamilton, would you propose an amendment to exclude certain things from this bill for the ranchers, farmers, et cetera, when they're just going across roads or something? Do you have any proposed amendments?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Hamilton.
Yeah, I have struggled with that. And, I don't know other than just, this law doesn't apply to certain agricultural people, which I don't think would be a very well-written amendment. I don't have anything that I could propose at this time.
I appreciate the senator going there, and Mr. Hamilton, maybe you could give some thought to that. I don't know if this bill will advance. If it does, there's plenty of time and lots of different steps that it would take. And that's something that we could consider. I don't know if contiguous language could be, like you said, we'd have to really think about that. But committee, anything else for the Farm Bureau this morning? Ken, thank you. Appreciate it. I think next up, Amanda, I hope I'm keeping these in somewhat of an order. Maybe we'll go to Mr. Prius.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. We also have a telephone number. They're unable to raise their hand. So if they want to speak, they actually need to dial *9 to raise their hand if they want to provide public comment.
Okay, thank you for that, Amanda. And hopefully whoever is on the telephone line, if you would do the *9 if you're desiring to testify this morning. Otherwise, we'll go to Mr. Prius and likely be done with public testimony. Samuel, are you there this morning? One more time for Mr. Prius. Okay, committee, I do not see any. We're going to take it kind of slow here for a moment, given the format. I want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to be heard this morning. So it doesn't look like we're going to be joined by Mr. Prius. We don't have anybody in the hopper. And so committee, I'm going to close public testimony and open it up for comments by the committee or thoughts by the committee. Senator Pappas.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to move this bill forward.
Okay, I've got a motion on the bill. Do I have a second for discussion? Seconded by Senator Furphy. And committee, I actually have a question that I'd like to go to Colonel Holler, if I could ask him to come back on for just a moment. I didn't get a chance to ask, thank you, Colonel. I didn't really get a chance to ask you this, but can you walk us through how realistic, I guess it would be, or how prevalent, or whether or not the expectations are appropriate for us to ask our highway patrolman to pull somebody over for not wearing a seatbelt? Given the fact that our troopers have their hands full out there with so many other things, what are your thoughts in that regard? Are we going to have law enforcement that will actually pull somebody over without a seatbelt? I would just appreciate your comments on that.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, that is a good question. Of course, thinking about this from a trooper perspective, oftentimes looking at individuals, violators at high speed. Having said that, the answer is yes. How often that would or would not happen, I'm not sure. What I do believe is because of the safety factors that have been identified throughout this morning, specific to wearing a seatbelt. Ultimately, that's what we're talking about. Is in an effort to, I guess, somewhat change the culture in Wyoming and get people to put on their seatbelts. Because at the end of the day, that I believe can have a positive impact on our state, certainly on the mental health of law enforcement and our troopers. But yes, I do believe that it would ultimately result in identifying some of those violations. But sir, to what extent, I don't know.
Okay, thank you for those thoughts, Colonel. Appreciate it. Committee, let's work the bill. It's a pretty short bill, pages 1 and 2. So I'll just open it up for any thoughts or suggestions on amendments. Are there any amendments for Senate File 11? Okay, are you ready for the question on Senate File 11? Amanda, if you would take roll on Senate File 11, please.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Senator Furphy.
Aye.
Senator McEwen.
No.
Senator Pappas.
Aye.
Chairman Landon.
Aye.
Chairman, you have 3 ayes and 1 no.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. So committee, I'm going to keep an eye on this one as it goes forward. A lot of steps for this bill. I lean in the direction of sending it forward just so that we can have further debate on this issue. It's obviously very important. A lot of people spend a lot of time on it, so we'll see going forward. Committee, right now, I'd like to take a 10-minute break, and we'll come back, I believe, to Senate File 10, which is the statutory amendment bill. But let's take a 10-minute break. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, committee. Appreciated that opportunity to take a quick break. Just as a reminder today, committee, we do have a hard stop under this format this week with our committee meetings. That hard stop will be at 12:30. I don't know if we'll go till 12:30, but we'll proceed and see how far we get. Next up for our consideration is Senate File 10. I see the director is back with us, and welcome back, Director Reiner. Would love to hear a little bit about Senate File 10.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. For the record, again, Luke Reiner, Director, WYDOT. Mr. Chairman, so part of the interim study was to take a look at the various statutes that affect the department. This is a multifaceted bill, and it stacks a bunch of statutes that need to be need to be taken care of as was worked during the interim. What I might suggest, Mr. Chairman, is there's a lot of experts that we'll have available to testify on this behalf. I think in the interest of time, I can hit the highlights. Some of these are an administrative fix and may not result in a lot of questions. And I think we'll just maybe go through it that way, section by section, if you're okay with it, and just handle each section at a time.
I think that sounds great, Director. I think if you just touch on what's happening in each of those sections of law, that'll be terrific.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll go ahead and then kick off with on page 2, 24-1-106. Let me just maybe walk you through what the issue here is that we're trying to remedy. So the bottom line is that WYDOT is responsible for the trafficability of our road system, and it supports the economic backbone of this state. We're authorized to open and close it as we need to in terms of weather and other events. And the statutes, fairly definitive in 24-1-106 in terms of when and when we can't close. And certainly weather and special events are called out. Special events in the case of the legislature, which is in the case of the statute, which is actually not even listed in what we include, are events that are outside of communities. Paragraph Charlie or C in 24-1-106 deals in an event that that occurs within an incorporated city or town on one of our state highways, which we are responsible for. And what happens is that many of our local streets are narrow and they are residential, and they involve parking, both residential and in some cases business. And while these routes obviously can safely accommodate passenger vehicle traffic, oftentimes they're not conducive to the safe movement of high volumes of highway traffic, specifically with tractor trailers. And now we have the advent of these long windmill blades, et cetera, et cetera. And so the policy's always been, and what the statute has spelled out is, hey, listen, if you want to have an event in your town, really what we want you to do is to work with the Wyoming Department of Transportation to ensure that if you close down your main street for an event, for a fair, for a parade, all of those type of issues that we certainly understand and certainly support, just need to have a pretty good alternate route that we all can support to keep commerce open for the rest of the state that's trying to pass through your community. And so what this paragraph deals with is really the synchronization of what's going on locally with the needs for movement across the state. And really what we have seen happen is a community will designate an alternate route, and it doesn't work very good. And so we'll get semis that go down residential streets and can't make turns, or there's streetlights that are too low and we can't get through, and we just end up with a terrible traffic jam and a terrible mess. And so the request in this statute and our recommendation is to clean up that language, to talk through a more refined process to ensure that we have closely synchronized our activities in the community with the streets. And so Mr. Chairman, what you see in front of you there is the language that the interim committee agreed to support in this bill, which really added the requirement for the city or town to consult with the department to determine whether, a readily accessible alternative route exists to safely detour traffic. And that's the addition that was made on page 6 through 8. And then if the department determines that no readily accessible alternate route exists, then we basically say, hey, listen, you guys need to request approval for closure because of the really negative effects that have been happening. Not a lot, but sometimes on our streets. Mr. Chairman, that's the history there. What I'll tell you is as we sort of, this was done early in the interim. And so since then, there has been some really suggested changes. And I would have an amendment to this language at some point, if you're so inclined to allow us to submit that really would add the requirement to submit a map and a drawing, and then basically say if there's not an adequate detour available, then the department is not required to approve the application to close the highway, because the city and county certainly have to apply to us to close that highway. Mr. Chairman, that's a quick summary. I would really like to just ask your permission to allow Mr. Tom Dehoff, who's our Assistant Chief Engineer for Operations, and he just came from the field, to elaborate on this issue just a bit.
Be glad to do that, Director Reiner. Thank you. And I will take you up on your offer to suggest whatever amendment you have in mind. And I do think that has been shared with the committee. So we're aware of it, but when we work the bill, Director, we'll ask you to stand by, and then we'll consider that when the time comes. How about that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That certainly works.
And let's go to Mr. Dehoff. Good morning, Tom. Welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members. The director hit it spot on. We do coordinate with our locals, the towns and counties, when they are doing a local event. And we really do have a great relationship with them. And we want to continue to do that because we do see the importance of having local events and that we do support those. And really, in general, we're doing really good on accommodating when they want to do a road closure. This kind of just sets us up to make sure that we do have the documentation in place, and then that the reviews are taken care of from a district traffic standpoint, and to also to accommodate the traveling public if they were not stopping at that a special event. So as the director said, this will be a good thing to put in. So that's all I have.
Okay, committee, any questions for Mr. Dehoff? And hopefully, Tom, you can stick around in case we need to ask you a question later. Appreciate it, gentlemen. So Director Reiner, I'll let you continue on down page 2.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Moving to line 13, 31-2-104. Mr. Chairman, this is one of those interesting issues where there's multiple statutes that give conflicting guidance. And so in this case, 31-2-104, which really talks about the transfer of ownership, and that's relative to vehicle titles, says, and you can see it in paragraph F, that if you're guilty of a misdemeanor, or correction, if you knowingly provide false or incomplete information, then you're guilty of a misdemeanor and have a $750 fine. If you go to paragraph 31-4-102 in statute, it basically talks about falsifications, alterations, and forgery, and the penalties there, which are closely tied to false and incomplete information. And the penalty there is a felony and $5,000. And so same event and different levels of a crime in statute. And so in discussion during the interim, the recommendation and the decision by the committee was to adopt the language and to go with the 314-102 relative to false information, and to keep the misdemeanor for incomplete information. And that would ensure that the statutes remain consistent. And so that's the change that you see added on page 2, line 19 through 22, where it says any person knowingly providing false information on any statement required by this act is guilty of a felony, and it refers to 314-102C. And so saw this as an administrative correction to align the level of crime between statute, and would stand for any questions on that topic.
Anything committee for the director on this one? Senator Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wow, it seems rather rough that we're saying if you provide false information on a title or whatever, it's a felony. That seems like a lot to me. I understand, and especially when it says incomplete information is misdemeanor, but also if they're just altering a title incorrectly to say it's a felony, I just would ask for input on that.
Director Reiner, that the distinction there is the misinformation versus false information. Can you talk to us a little more about that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Furphy, absolutely. And I've also asked several of my staff to join, Mr. Rossetti, Ms. Dobson, and Ms. Bruckner. And so let me start off, and they can likely add to this, but really in this case, it's predefined in law. And so the difference here is if you knowingly provide false information relative to a vehicle title, then in 314-102 in current law, that's been the determination of the level of the crime that's added. Let me see, with your permission, Mr. Chairman, what Mr. Rossetti would add to that.
Mr. Rossetti.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Furphy, the director did go into that well. And I think one of the things that helps too is if you go into the body of 314-102C, it basically clarifies this a little bit further and tells you that it's a felony if you provide these false informations with the intent to defraud. And one of the things that you can run into that probably people have heard about regarding a title is if that vehicle was damaged in a flood and you bring that vehicle up here and fraudulently say it's not flood damaged, and Senator McEwen decides to purchase that vehicle from you, the value of that vehicle can be grossly different, whether or not that vehicle was flooded or not. So really the reason for that felony, I think, is the severity of the crime and the intent to willingly defraud someone else by altering that title.
Thank you, Mr. Rossetti. Any follow-up, Senator Furphy? Senator Pappas.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I think the key is not just the false information, it's knowingly providing false information. So as Mr. Rossetti said, it's the intentionality. So if you intended and it was proven that you had an intention to defraud, then I think the felony is appropriate.
Okay, Director Reiner, please continue. Excuse me, Senator McEwen has a question.
Don't we already have laws on the books against fraud? No, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. We have laws against fraud already as a broad spectrum.
Probably goes to Mr. Rossetti. Do you want to try to handle that one?
Mr. Chairman, I'll certainly try to take a stab at that, Senator McEwen. Yes, as the director mentioned, right now in 31-2104, that wording is in conflict with the law that's in place to describe this type of fraud. And the law that's in place to describe this type of fraud is contained there in that language on the bottom of page 2, which is in Wyoming Statute 31-4102C. So what we're just trying to do is point out and draw clarity to those existing statutes so that there's no ambiguity as to the crime you're committing if you do this act.
So follow up, Senator McEwen.
Mr. Chairman, and maybe I'm lost, so I really want to ask this question. Is fraud for everything else a $5,000 fine and a felony, or just for vehicles and titles? At the end of the day, I think this needs to be even across the board, because in my mind, fraud is fraud, whether it's over a vehicle or a dog that you're representing as a purebred that isn't. So I think we open the door to make any type of fraud eventually a $5,000 felony, and it's kind of alarming. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator. I think there are several delineations in our green books with regard to fraud, and there are levels. Mr. Rossetti, I think the idea here is to try to make this consistent with 102. Is that a fair reading of what we're doing here?
Mr. Chairman and Senator McEwen, yes, that's a fair reading of what we're trying to accomplish, and slightly outside my scope of expertise as the administrator here at WYDOT. But I do believe that in Title VI, which are the criminal statutes that would cover fraud, specifically 6.3, 6.12, I do believe that fraud, it has this same penalty in other instances.
Okay. Director Reiner, please continue.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one comment on what Mr. Rossetti said. I completely agree here. You know, whether or not we agree or not agree with the amount of the fine is our goal here was to be consistent in the application of the law between statutes. Moving on then to page 3, line 1, 31-2-212. So the issue that this very sort of simple fixes is this: there are multiple fees that are authorized in regulation for us to charge. And in this case, we're dealing with the replacement of duplicate license plates that are obtained upon application from a county treasurer from where you purchased, your original plates. And the fees, for example, a duplicate certificate of registration is $4. If you need new license plates because you lost your old ones, they're $8. If you need a new validation sticker because it was lost, it's $6. All those are in statute. And then the law goes on to say, if you need a duplicate license plate and it's a prestige or specialty plate, then the cost for that is $30. And so 31-2-212 authorizes the charge for those rates. Now, what has happened over time is that we have added specialty plates, and the specialty plates are added in in different paragraphs of the statute. And so we have specialty plates that are not defined in 2-12 to collect the fee on. And so what this change does on line 14 and 15, it adds the statute that refers to the new specialty plates that have been added since the statute was originally written. And so the current specialty plates that are not included in the statute are street rods, custom vehicles, gold star plates, tribal license plates, and the new wildlife conservation plates. So what this does is this defines those plates as specialty plates by adding the statute numbers on 14 and 15, lines 14 and 15, and then which authorizes us to charge the $30 replacement fee if those are lost. So that's what that stipulation and change in code does.
Okay.
I probably.
Thank you, Director. Any questions on that section? Okay, please proceed, Director.
Thank you. So if we go down then to the next section, which is on the bottom of page 4, this one again gets into sort of some technical differences in current statute. And this one actually deals with the definition of a word in terms of principle or established. And just walk you through probably the issue here is that if you apply for a permit from us to have a direct sale manufacturer's license, then the description of in statute of the location from whence you must operate from is an established place of business. And then if you desire to renew your license to have these type of direct sale licenses, it talks about whether you will operate from a principal place of business, and then further on in the paragraph, it talks about an established place of business. And so we had the words established and principal, basically meaning the same two things in different parts of the statute, which has caused uncertainty in some realms for exactly what does that mean. And so that's what's in statute. And so the issue was, hey, is it principal or established, and what's the difference, and really sort of who cares? And so as you start looking at it, the principal place of business means, because it actually is sort of defined in statute, is for dealers selling fewer than 12 vehicles in any 12 consecutive months. And it then becomes a permanent commercial building located within the state of Wyoming. If you sell more than 12 vehicles in any 12 consecutive months, then the site must be a permanent building and located containing adequate facilities to carry on the business of a licensed dealer. And so then there's another statute, actually the one in discussion says an established place of business means each place actually occupied either continuously or at regular periods by a manufacturer where the manufacturer's books and records are kept. And so through discussion with the interim committee voted to streamline the references and make it a principal place of business. Now that's probably long and convoluted, and we can go into more detail if you wish, but the change again to align the definitions in various parts of the statute are depicted on page 5, line 2, and changes the word established to principal. I would probably ask Mr. Rossetti to clarify or to more clearly explain that, if with your permission, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Director, and we'll come back to you with questions. First, we'll go to Mr. Rossetti. And Mr. Rossetti, you have new members of this Transportation Committee. So in your words, what are we doing here?
Thanks for that opportunity, Mr. Chairman. So as Luke mentioned, there's a couple of different definitions that are used in the dealer statutes. And where this change that's on page 5, line 2 comes about is that term established place of business that was in the existing language models language for a Wyoming-based manufacturer. And if you look at what that definition really is, it basically says that the manufacturer will occupy that space and keep records, and a large portion of their business is actually conducted there. So that makes sense for a Wyoming-based manufacturer. We've had a few of those that were like trailer and RV type manufacturers. The language that's on page 5 there in that section, VIII, was added a couple of years ago through the session process. And what that does is that addresses a very specific sales model. These are vehicles that are sold straight from a manufacturer to the customer without using a franchise agreement like you guys are likely familiar with your hometown car dealerships. I would prefer not to use a proper name here or call out a manufacturer, but a certain electric vehicle manufacturer uses this model, right? They want to sell directly from them, the manufacturer, to you, the customer, and not have a middleman through a franchise agreement. So as we worked through that language, this idea of the established place of business was used because we were trying to create parity between the Wyoming-based manufacturer and the other direct sell manufacturer. In practicality, though, that established place of business would require that manufacturer to locate their manufacturing facility in Wyoming in order to operate. We believe, as we reviewed the intent and the direction when we created a direct sales manufacturer, the intent was for that manufacturer to have a facility in Wyoming to be able to sell vehicles from, and simply that, a commercial space to sell vehicles to the public from. That would more closely resemble the definition for a principal place of business. So this is really just cleaning up and allowing a direct sell manufacturer to essentially open a lot here to sell to you if you wanted to purchase their merchandise.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rossetti. Questions? Okay, Director, please continue.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I think on this next section, I'm going to just ask Mr. Rossetti to walk us through the issue because it certainly is in his area of expertise.
Okay, Mr. Rossetti, you just got the pitch of the football running to the outside again. So here you go.
Mr. Chairman, can I opt out?
You've got the football.
Thank you, sir. So continuing on and starting there on page 5, this is temporary recreational vehicle display sales permits. And these are licenses that are sometimes used in certain areas of the state when, say, there's an RV sale or a major manufacturer is going to do a road tour of the U.S. and make a stop in one of our communities. And as part of that, then people from out of state are going to want to come and be part of that RV show and sell vehicles. So what this does is it allows that to occur. These sales have occurred in southwestern Wyoming, northeastern Wyoming on an infrequent basis. And really what we're trying to do here is just align some of the existing language with the reality of some of the fees that are present currently. So with that background, the language that's contained there on page 5 in 3116-127, starting on line 12 through the end of that page, is actually just existing language there to help clarify the changes that occur then on page 6. Moving over to page 6, the change there that you see on line 3 really just talks about the cost of the demo plates. And these are the plates that you'd put on one of those vehicles to go take it for a test drive. So the change there is, instead of specifying in the actual section that it's a $50 fee, instead what the recommendation was to add, as set forth in Wyoming statute 31.3.102 AV. And what that does is that actually is the section 31.3.102 AV actually specifies what the cost of a demo plate is. It is currently $50, but if that were to ever change in the future, it's possible that an out-of-state dealer might actually be advantaged over an in-state dealer. So by making this change, anytime a change is made in 31.3.102, it would automatically be reflected here. So that's the change number 1 sitting at the top of the page. The second part of this also just relates to the way that business has changed over time. And the change there between lines 5 and 7 on page 6 also just align with the new business processes. And this is as it relates to the temporary permits. So this is if somebody actually purchases one of those vehicles. You may have noticed recently that we went from the old green tags to a computer generated white tag on these systems. And a consequence of that was that the minimum order for those temporary permits is no longer as low as it used to be. And unfortunately, the cost and the security required to run those systems also had changed. So the change there that you see on line 6 adjusts the minimum order that folks would have to do, which is currently 25. And it allows us to specify that in the department rules and regulations. So again, our current Wyoming dealers are under these restrictions to purchase these new temporary tags in these allotments at this price. This is again just creating parity if an out-of-state dealer comes in here for a temporary sale, so that they're not treated differently than an in-state dealer. With that, Mr. Chairman, I hope I didn't get too far off track, but that's what we're trying to achieve here.
Thank you, Mr. Rossetti. I think I'm following, and it strikes me that any opportunity we can do this through rules and regs. We have struggled for years with having some of these fees listed in statute, because then you have to go through a complete legislative process to go from $5 to $10, for example. But anyway, committee, any questions for Mr. Rossetti on this section of the bill? Okay, Director, please proceed.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So moving to the last section of this bill that starts on page 6 in the middle on line 11. So one of the fees that we charge in our state when you come to the port of entry is a $15 or $7.50 permit fee if you are not an IFTA registered truck. Now, I know for the new members on the committee, probably the IFTA, or the International Fuel Tax Agreement, is not something you might be familiar with. But the concept basically there is with IFTA trucks, as you traverse this nation and you buy fuel tax, there's an agreement with all states that basically sends back and reallocates that fuel tax income to states, so that it was like somebody, a truck or a commercial vehicle, purchased that fuel in your state. An example of that would be a commercial, an over-the-road truck has a big tank. It can fill in Nebraska, and it can run all the way through Wyoming, and it can fill again then in Utah. And there is no fuel tax revenue generated for us in the state of Wyoming. What IFTA does is it levels that playing field and it redistributes the income there. there are certain trucks that are not registered for IFTA. And so what this statute, what this paragraph allows is for us to collect a fee, $15 for a combination truck, $7.50 for a single truck, if it's not IFTA based, to mitigate for the fact that they may come into the state and not buy fuel. And we won't have the benefit of the IFTA sending us the fuel. So that permit's good for 96 hours. And the permit basically is for, right now as it exists, is for diesel and for gas. And so, but we are starting to see the advent of alternate fuels such as propane. And so what this statute change allows us to do is to add an alternate fuel vehicle to the vehicles that we can collect the revenue from. And so if you look on page 7, line 3 and 4, where it adds or 3917-306F, that's a reference to alternate fuel. And then you see on line 5 where it adds or alternate fuels. So what this does is it takes our existing ability to charge a diesel or gasoline powered truck that comes in non-IFTA, and it adds an alternate fuel to that list that we're authorized to charge, and would stand for questions on that.
Okay, committee, any questions of the director on this section of the bill? Okay, director, final thoughts or take us to the finish line?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that would really, conclude our review of this bill. So it's, various and sundry statute changes to make the department run more efficiently and effectively, and would stand for any overall questions on the bill.
Okay, thank you. Committee, anything before we go to public testimony? Okay, I'm going to go to public testimony on the bill. And I'm not seeing, Amanda, maybe you can help me out. Maybe you're seeing something that I'm not. Do we have anyone wanting to testify?
Mr. Chairman, I don't see anyone with their hands raised under attendees.
Okay, I don't either. So I'm going to close public testimony. Mr. Rossetti.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. I did just want to mention that the repealer section there on page 7, lines 13 and 14, does have a couple of one thing in there that I think would be of much interest to yourself, Mr. Chairman. So if you look there, section 2, Wyoming Statute 2614-105C, it is actually the requirement that currently specifies how an auto insurer can provide training that would lead to an auto insurance discount. This issue arose last year through some constituent in Wyoming, and this was the direction we chose to deal with that. So this is in the insurance section. And what this does is, instead of trying to modify the requirements for an insurer and how they would go about doing the training in order for you to get a discount, we worked with the insurance commissioner to just kind of review this language. And as we moved through that, we just determined that striking that language in its entirety, so that neither the insurance department nor the Department of Transportation was interfering with how an insurer would work with you in order to provide a discount. So what that repealer does is it removes that section within the title for insurance. I wanted to make sure you were aware that that was sitting here in this bill, and that we did work that with the commissioner over at the Department of Insurance if you had any other questions.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Rossetti, and I apologize for not pointing that out as well. That is a piece of the bill that it makes sense to me, committee, that WYDOT would not be in the business of deciding how you get a discount on your auto insurance, but If there's any questions, please have at it with Mr. Rossetti. Otherwise, we will be aware of that. Mr. Rossetti, thank you. Okay, committee, I have closed public testimony. What's your pleasure on this bill? Senator Furphy.
I'll move approval.
Okay, moved by Senator Furphy and seconded by Senator Pappas. Let's work our way through the bill. Committee, once again, this is an interim topic. It's been worked by the Transportation Committee and passed out of that previous committee. Nonetheless, we do have at least one suggested amendment from the director of WYDOT. I'm hoping that you all had an opportunity to see that. But I'm going to go to Director Reiner real quickly. The top of page 2, Director Reiner, you have suggested some new language for paragraph C.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our suggestion on paragraph C, the change here, what you see in the proposed amendment, really what it does is a couple things. One, it says, hey, listen, as we seek to work together, we would ask that you submit a map or drawing depicting the proposed highway detour, including, the signs that we would have out there to help with the detour. In addition, on the third line, the second word is the, and it used to say there. And I think one of the important things as we started pulling this back is it is very possible that a city or town may not be the person who actually wants to host it. It could be the Boy Scouts. It could be any number of other entities. And our request here is that, hey, listen, if you're one of those entities, we ask you to work with the city and the town to ensure that you have coordinated what you want to do to hold your event, and that it's synchronized between you as the hosting agency and the city or the town. And that would include this map that you've sort of agreed on what you want to do locally, so that we in WYDOT know what we will support. So that's really the change to that and the intent of that first sentence in paragraph C. And then the second sentence says, if the department deems the proposed detour inadequate to accommodate the highway traffic, the department will work with the city or town to identify a suitable detour. And I think that's really key to be in there. It says, hey, listen, we will work with you to find a suitable detour. And it may mean we have to back off a couple miles from where you're at and say, hey, let's detour down a county road, or let's detour down another state road, in order that you can do what you want to do in your community. And then the last sentence then says, if there is no adequate detour available, the department is not required to approve the application to close the highway. And that I think is important to be in law. We will always work to approve the application, because we think that's really important as we work with communities to ensure they can do what they want in their community, while at the same time balancing the need for commerce throughout the state. Mr. Chairman, that would be a summary of the slightly reworded paragraph C.
Okay, thank you, Director. I appreciate it. I do want to check with Amanda and Katie and make sure that that you have in your possession the proposed amendment. Amanda, do you have that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I do.
Okay, and then I want to check with the committee members. You will have received that email from the director, and hopefully have in your possession the proposed amendment for paragraph C on page 2. Does everyone have that, and have you read it? Okay, just making sure. So Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I agree with all the proposed changes, and I would move the amendment as provided by the director.
Okay, thank you. I will not require a second on that. motion. The amendment has been moved. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Okay, all in favor of the amendment on page 2, please raise your hand so that I can do a count. Okay, and that amendment has passed 4-0. So that amendment on page 2, continuing to the bottom and on through the rest of the bill. Do we have any further amendments? Anything else? Okay. Amanda,
Question on the bill, Mr. Chairman.
please take roll on Senate File 10.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Senator Furphy,
Aye.
Senator McEwen,
Aye.
Senator Pappas,
Aye.
Chairman Landon.
Hi. Thank you very much, Amanda. Senator Furphy, would you be willing to kind of get up to speed on this one and take it out into the fray when we get to the Senate?
Mr. Chairman, I'll give it a good try.
And as always, we're right behind you if a fight breaks out. How about that? Thank you for that, Senator Furphy. You'll have that one on the floor then. And let's move on to Senate File 4 Committee. Airport districts. And I'm hopeful that that we can get a rundown on what this bill does. So Amanda, have you heard from anyone in this regard? We do have Mr. Brubaker has his hand up this morning, and he would maybe be a good one to go to.
Mr. Chairman, I just admitted him into the meeting room.
Okay, thank you. Well, let's go ahead and start with Mr. Brubaker as we wade into Airport District Senate File 4. Good morning, Devin. Thanks for your patience. Welcome to Senate Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the time and the opportunity to present to you today. Curious how you would like to proceed. I am prepared to do a rundown of the bill, but I also have testimony on the background of the bill. So how would you like me to proceed? Which one would you like me to do first?
I think a good background and an overview, and then we can walk through this, I think, at a pretty high level. I'm not sure that we have to go section by section or line by line. I would say to the committee, if we have specific questions, we can sure fire them at you, Mr. Brubaker. But tell us what brought this bill about, and then we can quickly walk through it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just a quick introduction. My name is Devin Brubaker. I'm the airport director at the Southwest Wyoming Regional Airport in Rock Springs. I'm also here representing the Wyoming Airports Coalition, which represents Wyoming's 40 public use airports. Wyoming's 40 public use airports provide critical connectivity to each community that we serve, providing immense economic activity throughout the state of Wyoming, supporting nearly 10% of statewide employment. And I lost my notes here. I apologize. Gotta love technology. I apologize, Mr. Chair.
Hey, you don't have to apologize, Mr. Brubaker. It happens to us too. We're all getting used to this.
Yes, so
progress. Right?
We support nearly 10% of statewide employment, more than $1.3 billion in annual economic activity, over 80 million in state and local tax revenues, and over 20,000 jobs statewide. Only 3 of our state's 40 public use airports are financially self-sustaining. The other 37 require over $10 million each year in financial support from counties, cities, and towns to cover labor, maintenance, utilities, and capital costs.
Mr. Brubaker,
During the interim,
sorry to interrupt, but what was that figure you just gave me? What kind of support figure was that?
over $10 million.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman.
Please continue.
During the interim, the Joint Committee heard testimony from the Department of Transportation regarding the $45 million in annual unfunded needs in the Wyoming aviation system. Combined with the operational deficits that airports experience, Wyoming airports need at least $55 million per year in funding above and beyond what exists today to be able to ensure a safe and secure air transportation system that generates immense activity, economic value and activity to the state of Wyoming. We recognize that these funding needs cannot be covered by the state or our local government entities. Furthermore, many of Wyoming's airports are run by either an airport board or a joint powers board. Those entities are subject to statutorily mandated requirements of special districts. However, airport boards and airport joint powers boards are not given the same authority to go to voters to seek financial assistance. We recognize the financial burden that our operations place on local entities and that it causes government bodies across the state to split limited resources between our activities that drive economic value and other important services to the residents. We recognize that there was an issue here, so we went to work to find a solution. So in an effort to find that solution, we looked across the country to look at what other states are doing to govern their airports. The most successful models that we found are airport districts and/or airport authorities, just different names, but generally the same type of governance structure. They allow for local communities and their residents to have local control over how their airports are funded. This governance style allows for the imposition of mill levies to support airport operating and capital expenditures. We studied existing statutes here in Wyoming that authorize the creation of various types of special districts, and we suggest that this enabling legislation will ensure our industry can continue to improve and offer sustainability through local control. We have involved stakeholders throughout the drafting of this bill and look forward to working with the legislature and those stakeholders throughout the rest of the process. I want to be clear that this legislation does not create special districts. It does not create a new tax. It is simply enabling legislation that provides local control to county commissions to establish and design boundaries for special districts, and in a public process do so before even going to the voters to ask for their support of a mill levy. An airport district allows voters to support the value of their airport without competing with other services that are funded with local general fund dollars. They allow for communities to ensure that they have the necessary funding to compete for FAA Airport Improvement Program grant funds that require a local match of 2.5% to 10% to be available at a moment's notice to be able to accept those grants. The formation of a special district would allow the funding necessary to ensure that federal dollars are never turned away. It provides a level of confidence in future funding for grants and improvements that is not available to Wyoming's airports today. Federal Aviation Administration funding is competitive, and having the ability to say yes to an unplanned grant offer with little notice is only possible for 3 airports in Wyoming. If we want to position Wyoming to compete for these federal dollars and continued investment in our economy, we need to be assured we have the ability to match those dollars. There are also projects and improvements that are not eligible for grant funding, but just as important to the airports and the communities that they serve. So any funds generated from a special district could assist in those improvements and operations as well. We recognize the state and our local communities are in a tough spot financially. We've made a concerted effort to find a solution in a time where they're needed more than ever. Airports are key economic drivers to the communities that we serve. Our fiscal health is paramount to ensuring that we continue to drive economic activity and growth across the state. By providing communities with a new tool in the toolbox that allows local control, our state's airports and the communities they serve will be able to thrive for many years to come. We ask you to support this bill and thank you for your time and consideration. And I would normally say I'll stand for questions. I'll stand for questions, but also happy to run through the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Brubaker, thank you. Really appreciate all your comments. That catches us up in good fashion. The new committee is still getting up to speed on all of these bills, including this one. And having worked with you, sir, on our corporations committee with some of the things that you do in the Southwest, thanks for all of those comments you made. Before we go specifically into the bill for an overview of exactly what it does at a fairly high level, committee, any questions at this point? Senator Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me understand, reading through this, I'm a little confused. Are these districts developed solely by resolution, or does the public have to vote for establishing these districts?
Mr. Brubaker?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Furphy, excellent question. This bill allows county commissions to establish special districts by resolution. However, it would have to go to the voters for the imposition of any taxation. So while the district could be created, there is no taxation that occurs without approval of a majority of the voters of the district.
Okay, any follow-up, Senator? Okay, Devin, I'm going to ask if you could run us through the bill. I think that'd be helpful. And like I said, we don't need to have the bill read to us or anything, but stay at a level where we understand what the bill is doing.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I will do my best to be brief with it. So as we start on page 1, we have the typical introduction. As we move into page 2, we are creating statute 10-5401 through 10-5404. And what this does in the aeronautics portion of the statute, it basically creates the mechanism that allows for airport districts to be created by county commissioners. Starting on line 10, it speaks about how a county commission can establish an airport district through resolution. As you get to line 15, it lays out the process in which the county commission is able to create an airport district and what composition of the board would exist for the board of directors. It also speaks about the inability for a special district to encompass a municipality that already has another airport board. So you can't have some overlap there, basically. As you move into page 3, we jump into if a joint powers board is used under current governance, all parties to that joint powers board must agree to the formation of the district. So for example, here in Sweetwater County, we operate on a joint powers board for the airport. The City of Rock Springs and Sweetwater County are parties to that joint powers agreement. They would have to both agree to transition to a special district. As you move into line 6, it talks about that there has to be a plan to transfer power of the airport to the district and all responsibility for the operation of the airport, including ownership and debt as necessary. Line 11, and that paragraph requires the submission of the proposed boundaries to the county assessor and Department of Revenue, and they have 60 days to review prior to the adoption of a resolution. As you move into line 21 and into page 4, it addresses that upon adoption, the districts shall be a governmental subdivision of the state of Wyoming and a body corporate that can be that can sue and be sued. I apologize. It shall have perpetual existence unless dissolved as allowed later in the legislation. And it also requires the certificate of incorporation be on file with the Secretary of State and County Clerk. As you get down further on page 4, line 13, it speaks how a district boundary can be modified over the course of its existence. As we get into line 17 through 19, it requires airport districts to be governed by existing statute, the Special Districts Elections Act of 1994. I'd like to just say at this point that nearly all of these requirements mirror other special districts in the state of Wyoming. So we're not creating new requirements generally. It's following what already exists for other special districts. For page 5, as we dive into page 5 here, it starts talking about the governing board, 3 to 9 appointed board members. It needs to be mutually agreed upon by the governing bodies of the counties and municipalities located within the district, and the terms are for 3 years. Line 16 speaks about electing president, vice president, and so forth of the board. As we dive into page 6, line 4 through 6, authorizes an airport district to exercise the same powers granted to municipalities and counties under Title 10, Chapter 5. basically saying that municipalities and counties are able to operate and maintain an airport. It allows special districts to have those same powers. As you move on into the paragraph starting with line 8, it allows the governing body to hire the staff necessary to operate and maintain the airport. Paragraph starting with line 14 allows the governing body to establish ordinances necessary to operate the district and requires such ordinances to be on file with the county clerk. It requires the management to be in compliance with the Uniform Municipal Fiscal Procedures Act as required by all special districts in the state. Line 22 going into page 7, it speaks to how a county commission could remove a member of the governing body from the board of directors if necessary. Page 7, the paragraph starting with line 8, talks about the dissolution of the airport district. There was an amendment during the interim to this paragraph, line 18. I believe it added the word accepting public entity on line 18 instead of just being accepting entity. As we go from page 7 into page 8, this is where it starts talking about the ability to go to the qualified electors of the district on a question whether the district shall annually levy not to exceed 3 mills to operate the district. And it goes into detail of what you have to do to be able to go through that process. As you move into line 20 towards the bottom of that page, it speaks to the Board of County Commission, how they levy that tax and where the money must be placed in an account. Once again, language that's all on par with other special districts in the state. Page 9, lines 6 through 13 allows airport districts to issue revenue securities for the purpose of operating and maintaining an airport in the same manner that hospital districts do under Title 35. So once again, utilizing existing state statute. And the rest of the legislation after that, Mr. Chairman, is all conforming amendments to existing statute in Title 10, 16, 22, and 39 that either the airports or LSO have captured to ensure that special districts fall in line with the rest of the state statute. So hopefully I didn't go through it too quick, and I was able to give you an overview that gives you what you need.
No, I really appreciate it, Mr. Brubaker, and hope that you might be willing to share your notes to somebody like me before we would take this out on the floor, if it's the pleasure of this committee to pass it on to the Senate. Very well done. I would just say to the committee, and Senator Furphy can vouch for the fact that subdivision law looks very complicated, and that's why this bill is pretty extensive, because it has to conform in a lot of different ways to our to many of the things that you pointed out, Mr. Brubaker. So appreciate all your work on this bill, and really want to tip the hat to our legal staff too for the drafting of the legislation. So committee, any questions for Mr. Brubaker on Senate File 4? Okay, Mr. Brubaker, if you'll hang tough with us in case there's a question a little bit later, we might dive back to you. And I see where Mr. Obermuller has raised his hand. And so Amanda, if you could bring him in, or Katie. Mr. Obermuller, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here in front of Senate Transportation. My name is Pete Obermuller. I'm the president of the Petroleum Association of Wyoming. Mr. Chairman, just in the interest of new members of the Senate, just take 1 second to explain who I am. I represent the oil and gas industry in Wyoming. PAW represents about 200 companies and individuals who operate in the oil and gas industry in Wyoming, including upstream operators and developers and drillers, midstream pipelines and gathering systems, downstream refiners, and then everybody who orbits that whole thing, from environmental consultants to geologists to engineers, attorneys, and all of that. All told, Mr. Chairman, my members produce for the state about $5 billion in economic activity every year. Just for a frame of reference, that is more than double the next two top industries, the second and third place industries in the state. Oil and gas produces more than double in economic development for the state. So, Mr. Chairman, I wanted to chime in on this bill, not because PAW has essentially a strong position for or against, but I think it's important for the members to sort of keep in mind what special districts are and how the boundaries are drawn and what that means in a larger context in terms of Wyoming's tax code. Mr. Brubaker is entirely right. The bill does not in and of itself create a tax. That would have to go to voters, just like all the other special districts. I have some painful memories and scars from being an active part of the special districts task force some years ago when we tried to sort of wrestle some of these issues regarding special districts. At that time, there were over 750 special districts in the state of Wyoming. And at the time, they commanded over $1 billion in tax revenue at the time. Mr. Chairman, the oil and gas industry pays about 40% of the property tax in Wyoming. We pay 70% of the property tax in the minerals category. The fact of the matter is that if you want to raise money from a mill levy, the only way to do it is to make certain that the boundaries capture oil and gas projects. If it only captures the city limits of Green River or Rock Springs or anywhere else, it simply won't raise enough money. So it has to attach to it an increase for oil and gas in order to raise money. That simply is what it is. Like I said, we don't have really an opinion for or against, but as the discussion continues to lead towards what does Wyoming do to move away from such heavy dependence on oil and gas, I would simply posit that these sorts of things don't accomplish that goal. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Happy to answer questions.
Questions for Mr. Obermueller? Pete, thank you. Appreciate you coming today. And Senator Furphy's got a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Obermueller, so what is your concerns with forming these airport districts? Are you saying because they may overlap some of your pipelines, et cetera, and you're worried about increased taxes from airport districts? I'm a little confused here. Sorry. Thank you.
Mr. Obermueller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Furphy. Yeah, I appreciate it. And again, let me be clear. I mean, my members need to use the airline service and airports too for their ability to move in and out of the state. So it's not that the infrastructure is not important. It most certainly is. I simply want the community to have an eyes wide open understanding of what special districts do when they draw these boundaries. So you're exactly right. When they draw, the boundaries are likely to be county-wide, and in order to capture everything inside them, every single taxable entity inside them, and they have to do that in order to really, for 3 mills to raise any appreciable money, it has to capture oil and gas projects and other mineral projects. So it will, at the end of the day, raise revenue largely on the backs of the mineral industry, including oil and gas, which pays the lion's share of it. Now, Mr. Chairman, that still did not lead my association to oppose the bill because 3 mills is not a giant amount. It's just that, Mr. Chairman, we have this one in another committee. We have one to raise electricity rates on my members. There's just a lot of them, and I just want the community to be eyes wide open. But again, I want to be clear: my association did not take a position for or against.
Thank you, Mr. Obermueller. I appreciate you pointing out that that $1.3 billion in economic activity, some of it does come through those airports. And so I appreciate you pointing that out. Senator Furphy, any follow-up? Okay, any other questions of Mr. Obermuller? Senator McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Obermuller, as we go forward and you're looking at 3 mills here, 4 mills there, at what point in time do we run into danger, and are we getting close to running into danger to really hurting the gas and oil market as we go into this new economy?
Mr. Obermuller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, where you draw the line is that's a that's the multi-million-dollar question that is difficult to answer. It's really different for every single company. I think, to be perfectly honest, right now we're a little bit more worried about the Biden administration than we are about this bill. So that I think poses a bigger threat to Wyoming's industry. But Mr. Chairman, we've had this conversation a lot over the last few years. The Colorado legislature's version of LSO issued a study last year about comparative effective tax rates in oil and gas states, and Wyoming's was the most expensive, more than a little bit, about double Colorado's. So we're a high tax state, but we like being here. We have good resource here, and obviously it's a great place. So it's simply, again, just in the interest of making sure that everyone sort of understands that special districts are an interesting phenomenon in Wyoming and have an interesting dynamic. And for policymakers, it's just important to know that.
Thank you. Any follow-up, Senator?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make sure I understand, and maybe everybody else understands. Your tax basis is 100% on your property taxes, correct?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
And the rest of us are paying about 9.5%, maybe 10. So every mill levy we strap on to a county, we tend to hurt oil, gas, and coal more than anywhere else. And I think we should keep that in mind as we do this. A tax is a tax, but we can control where it comes from. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate that. Committee, anything more for the Petroleum Association? Senator Furphy.
Well, I'm just curious here. My understanding is these airport districts only cover certain areas covered by the airport. It's not necessarily county-wide. So I know our airport here is very limited in the land that they control. So yeah, that's what my original question was. How does that impact the oil industry? Because that's very much of concern to me. I don't want to increase the taxes on the oil industry. I thought it was only those members within the special district that vote for that tax. So I obviously am confused, and I'd like to understand that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Furphy. And I'm going to go to Mr. Obermuller first for your comments, and then I think Mr. Brubaker might be able to shed some light too. So, Pete.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thanks. And I'm sure Mr. Brubaker can do this as well. Given my former position running the County Commissioners Association and the Special Districts Task Force, I'm more intimately familiar with special districts than I actually care to admit. But the way that it works is precisely as Mr. Brubaker described in the bill, is that they have to go through a process of setting up those boundaries. The boundaries aren't limited by the boundaries of the airport itself. So they're limited by whatever the boundary is drawn by the process and ultimately by the county commissioners. And so you think of your hospital districts or your conservation districts or special improvement districts, or I mean, there's 46 possible special districts, I think, and those boundaries can be drawn basically however the county would like to draw them. Then the people within the county in that boundary have to vote for it, and it has to reach a certain threshold for it to go in. Of course, the oil and gas industry that operates inside that boundary doesn't have a vote. Obviously, it's a corporation or a small business or whatever. It's not a person in the sense of voting. So for special, like I said, for special districts to raise any appreciable money, they need to draw in minerals in order to capture the value of the mill levy there. So that's why.
Thank you, Mr. Obermueller, for those thoughts. And Mr. Brubaker, would you like to step in and weigh in a little bit on the special district conversation?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Obermueller spot on with his analysis of special districts. But I would add that because the district boundaries are established at the local level through a very public process, it does give the opportunity for the mining industry, the extraction industry, corporations, industry to come before the county commissioners and speak to it. An example here in our community is we have a very large asset here in Sweetwater County, the Trona industry, and very, very important to our community. And we have some special districts that the boundaries were drawn specifically to avoid including the Trona industry based on their feedback to the county commission. And so I would encourage the committee, and I 100%, airports, we rely on the petroleum industry and our extraction industry for our business as well. And we're not in the business of trying to hurt our existing industry. I think this is a local decision, a local control item. And we've demonstrated that here in Sweetwater County, where we recognize the importance of our employers, our large employers, and we have them at the table when we make decisions like this. And I would venture to, and I'm confident in saying that other communities would be doing the same. We all recognize the importance of our oil and gas, our coal, our trona, uranium, you name it. We're not going to bite the hand that feeds us, if you will, is how I look at it and how our members look at it.
Thank you, Mr. Brubaker. Follow up, Senator Furphy? Or are we good on that front?
No, that helps a lot. Mr. Chairman, I was confused. I thought it was only those members within a certain defined area. And now I'm hearing it could be countywide, and that could impact these industries. So that changes my position on this. I misunderstood before. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Furphy. And I think we are learning from Mr. Obermueller, Mr. Brubaker, that's going to, as the bill stands, that's going to be primarily up to your local elected officials. Your county commission is going to decide how this goes in each of those communities out there. But Mr. Obermueller, you had another thought for us?
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to close with one thing that I meant to say in response to Senator McKeon's question, that talk about an airport that is utmost importance to my members is the Gillette Airport. Holy cow, that we need that airport to be good and to run smoothly and to be safe and operational and all of that. So I can't overstate how important the Gillette Airport is to my members. So again, I just want to point out that we don't support or oppose the bill, but special districts require just a little bit more discussion sometimes, I think, and so I apologize if I threw a wrench in anything. I didn't really mean to. I just want special districts to be thought about carefully.
No, Mr. Obermueller, I appreciate it. I'm going to go to Senator McEwen, but I do want to point out to the committee we do have Mr. Riemann here with us today too, and I look forward to his comments. So, Senator McEwen.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Obermueller, I actually like the structure of this, and what I heard is you all have a vote in it. Far be it for me as an elected official to go above and beyond what the people want, especially in their local communities. And I do agree we need airports. I just wanted to make sure we understood, and you really helped me out. Actually, Mr. Brubaker, you did, with the ability for the extraction industry to actually have a vote on it, because ultimately you're going to end up paying 70% of the taxes. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for those comments, Mr. McEwen. And I think he probably meant Mr. Brubaker. Don't you think so? Don't you think that's right? Anyway, I'm going to move on to Jeremiah Riemann. Mr. Riemann is here. And we know, thank you for being here, Jeremiah. Thanks for your patience. Good to see you.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Happy to address you. Mr. Chairman, I do see that Senator Guru is out there, and I hate to jump in front of a sitting senator on a topic if he's intending to talk.
You know, we're going to give that senator an opportunity here in a few minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I am Jeremiah Riemann. I represent the County Commissioners Association, and happy to talk with you on this topic. I'd like to start out by saying that when the conversation of special districts comes up with my members, it's generally a negative thing. These sorts of things can provide a lot of pressure on county commissioners and frankly, the other elected officials and personnel within the county. And Mr. Obermueller certainly highlighted some of those issues that can exist. He, having served in my position before me, knows this very well. This happens to be one of those areas, however, where the commissioners are supportive. They are appreciative of the outreach that the airport operators have done on this particular issue and the concerns that they've heard and worked to address through this. Commissioners see a couple of positive benefits, and that's what helps to drive their support here. One is that there is continuing pressure, as you know, on county general funds, and any opportunity to ease some of that pressure is something that they're interested in. Again, if the voters are interested in seeing a special district in their jurisdiction. The other part of this that is of interest to commissioners is that opportunity to access federal funds at more locations throughout the state. And Mr. Brubaker talked about that potential. And a third component of this is the economic development angle. Certainly, as Senator McEwen mentioned, and Mr. Obermueller about the Gillette Airport, we saw the benefits of this in Laramie County when we were able to access operations through either Dallas or Denver, and the assistance that provided to the oil and gas industry here. We see it benefiting Park County, Sweetwater County, Natrona County. Sheridan County is a great example where for a lot of years they lost their TSA personnel. And it literally, and I'm not kidding here when I say it, it took an act of Congress to get that TSA personnel back into that community. So airports are vital components of our community for personal and for business travel. I just wanted to close and say that commissioners will have a role. They don't have unilateral say here. They have to listen to the voters and other constituents within their communities to draw the boundaries, to determine what that should look like and put that to a say of the voters on whether they want to pursue. But it also provides, even once it's established, a number of different requirements for commissioners. There are responsibilities for appointing individuals to these special districts. There's the responsibility in some ways for record keeping. The commissioners have to certify the mill levy, so that becomes part of their budget process. And it also puts additional pressures on county clerks, and others that are involved in the collection of those taxes that would go to these districts. Again, all of that said, commissioners do stand in support. And Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Riemann, thank you. As always, great information that's really helpful to us. So senators, any questions for the County Commissioners Association? And Jeremiah. Okay, thank you very much, Jeremiah, for being here. And you too, if you're going to be hanging around, we may come back to you at some point. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Amanda and Katie, I'm not showing anyone else from the public who wishes to testify, unless you are.
Chairman Landon, I don't see anyone. I know Brian Olson has raised his hand. He's in the webinar currently.
Oh, thank you. I did not mean to overlook Brian. So let's go to Mr. Olson, and my apologies for overlooking you, sir. Welcome, Mr. Olson.
Thank you and good morning, Mr. Chairman. For the record, my name is Brian Olson. I'm the Aeronautics Administrator for WYDOT, and happy just to provide a couple of comments for the committee this morning. As you all know, here in the Aeronautics Division of WYDOT, we work very closely with our 40 public use airports across the state, and they're a very important part of our transportation infrastructure. We've seen that recently with some vaccine distribution. As we reviewed this bill, Mr. Chairman, we do not see anything in the bill that would negatively impact how we work with the airports, and don't see any issues along those lines. So I just wanted to pass that along, that it shouldn't have any impact on the Aeronautics Division here at WYDOT.
Committee, any questions for Mr. Olson with regard to the aeronautics portion of what we do with WYDOT? Brian, thank you. And thanks for your patience this morning on this virtual format. It's a little more difficult, and appreciate you being here.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Committee, unless there's anything else, I'm inclined to close public comment on this bill. I'm going to close public comment. Committee, what's your pleasure on this bill?
I'll move the bill.
Okay, it's been moved by Senator Pappas. Do I have a second on the bill? Senator McEwen, thank you. That's moved and seconded. So committee, let's work the bill. I would point out that we are nearing the witching hour. We have a hard stop in about a half an hour. So we'll move our way on through this bill, and I do want to get to a couple of things before we have to depart today. So I'm not going to go page by page. Again, this is a bill that's been worked during the interim. The previous Transportation Committee has seen it, has put it in pretty good shape, I think. Are there any proposed amendments? I'm going to give plenty of time for anything that the committee senators might have. If there are no changes to the bill proposed, are you ready for the question? Okay, let's take roll, Amanda, on Senate File 4, Airport Districts.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Senator Furphy.
Aye.
Senator McEwen.
Aye.
Senator Pappas.
Aye.
And Chairman Landon.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, it passes.
Thank you, Amanda. Committee, I'll be glad to try to run this out onto the floor with the hope that you all might be willing to back me up on it. And before he leaves, I might again ask Mr. Brubaker if he'd be willing to drop me an email that would include some notes. And Mr. Riemann, likewise to you, you've always been very helpful on that front. So, okay. Committee, that puts us through the first 4 bills on our list today and brings us to Senate File 3. I will tell you right now, we're not going to have time to complete this bill, but I'm very happy that Senator Guru is with us to give us a little bit of background on Senate File 3. Thank you for your patience, Senator. Good to see you, and I'm going to ask if you could catch us up to speed and help us understand what brought us Senate File 3. Even if we can't work the bill today, I'd like to have a little background.
Well, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, can you hear me okay? We have.
Perfect. We're good.
First, thank you for the opportunity. I know you have a hard stop. I got to say to start, I've been listening to your meetings since the beginning and heard your thoughtful consideration of all these bills. And my hat's off to you. I thought you did a great job. I know some of those are a little bit of a thicket to work through, and it was interesting discussion. I'll look forward to seeing those on the floor. And your discussions helped me a lot, to be honest with you. Senate File 3 is a bill that frankly I wrote almost 2 years ago, and it works on a problem that was specific to Teton County is how it started. We have a high mountain path over here in Teton County going over towards Idaho, Highway 22, and it goes over Teton Pass. It's a 8,800 foot pass. So the valley floor here is 6,200 feet. And there's a lot of 10% grades on that road. And so that poses problems for heavy vehicles coming down the other side from Idaho. And so much so that years ago, Wyoming, the WYDOT Department, Wyoming Department of Transportation, put a limit on the weight of vehicles coming over the path. Starting back in Swan Valley, Idaho, there's flashing signs that say that there are weight restrictions. There's signs about every mile going up the pass, and they've been there for quite a few years. Unfortunately, due to GPS navigation and maybe some less scrupulous operators, going over Teton Pass is shorter, it's quicker, and it's more cost efficient for some haulers. And so some of them feel that some of them just don't read the signs very well. Others figure that they'll get a ticket one time every 10 times over, since there's no 24-hour enforcement. And so they just take a chance. And the problem is that maybe 1 out of 50 lose their brakes. And we end up with some bad accidents. We've had injuries. We haven't had any direct deaths lately, but there have been. But the other problem then that exacerbates this is that it's that area, Idaho, where that road goes, has become a bedroom community for workers in Teton County. There are times on Highway 22, as you leave our valley and head up that hill, that road gets as much traffic on a daily basis as Interstate 80. And so the problem is that when these trucks decide to take this run over the pass, either real or unintentional, it could, and as traffic increases, it could turn out to be a potentially, high death count situation. And so so how do you solve the problem? Well, we have at the top of the hill a turnout and a weigh station. Unfortunately, to man it would cost north of $300,000 a year to man it full time. Then we talked about putting more troopers on the road. Well, you run into the same expense problem. Lots of reoccurring expense to man both of those or either of those situations. So how do you solve the problem? Now, another way to do it would be close off the pass for trucks totally. That would create an undue burden on folks that are trying to conduct business legally and operate legally and come down the pass safely every day. So that was unacceptable, at least to me. Although a lot of my constituents feel just banning the trucks altogether would be the simple way out. So in kind of noodling this, so the last couple of years, I came up with another solution. It was more of a technological solution. And that was to put a scale in the roadbed just after, just before the state line. And when a truck goes over and is heavy, right there at that turnaround, a light flashes and says, "You're overweight, pull over here." If you feel it's in there, you can call the police, and a highway patrolman could be dispatched to come over and settle the problem by running it through the scale or just working it out. But basically, if you went on up the pass, they'd take a picture of your license plate and send you a ticket. Therefore, every truck that went overweight would get a ticket. So that would cut out the bad actors and send them a message about sending it over. That was it. That is Senate File 3 in its inception. Well, I talked to General Reinert and Colonel Haller over at WYDOT, and we all got to talking, and it came up about construction zones. And that the general, and I don't want to speak for him, but what the genesis of the conversation I had is that there's a lot of concern at WYDOT. And I think you all of us that drive Wyoming roads a lot are concerned about what happens in construction zones, active construction zones, where men and women are working. And so he suggested that maybe we use that as use this photographic tool that way. As you senators know, and I'm sorry, our newest Senator McEwen, I know you weren't involved in this bill, but Senator Ellis had legislation recently about school buses and cars passing school buses and using this same type of evidence. So that was another piece of kind of what my thinking was. Anyway, so when the bill got drafted, fortunately or unfortunately, a couple other things got thrown in for local options, to say if there was a school zone that a town was having a particular problem with, or a road outside of town that maybe some high school kids were using for drag racing or something, that if local communities wanted to use this to their benefit, like my community wants to use for overweight trucks, give them the opportunity to do so. That is where the bill that you see in front of you kind of came from. And so we worked this bill through the committee, and I explained it to them just as I've explained it to you now, and it passed out of committee, and so now it comes to you today. And I've seen in the last few weeks a certain amount of traffic over the internet speaking about this bill, and wow, all I can tell you is I'll come clean right off. I am the author of this bill. I brought it to the committee. I asked the chairman, the previous chairs of this committee, Chairman Eklund, Chairman Van Vleuteren, if they would sponsor the bill, because I wanted them to take it to an interim topic so we could have a wider discussion. And we did, and it came to you. But somehow this has gotten twisted into something way, 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 way beyond what I intended, for sure. And I know what everyone else intends as well. And so I wanted to do, and I asked the chairman, I know you're not going to work this bill today, but what I wanted to do is explain the genesis of the bill. In each of your inboxes, Chairman, I sent this to you before, but you senators today, in each of your inboxes right now is a package of amendments that I had LSO draft up that would strip away every piece of this bill except for my Teton Pass portion. Strip out the school zones, strip out the other roads, even strip out the construction zones, although I would argue the active construction zone, I think, has a lot of merit, and I think is something that would, if you, especially in the last couple of years, if you've seen, we've been through some program, I don't know if it's federal or state, but we've been working on a lot of bridges. When you're riding over bridges, there's no way out. And then in those construction areas, particularly on bridges, it's been problematic. I know if you've driven over them when they're working on those bridges, you have to slow down. And when people don't, it looks very dangerous. And there really isn't many ways out. So I would ask your consideration when you do take up this bill to take a good hard look at those construction zones, active construction zones. I'm talking about when they leave at night, they turn the camera off. When they go away for the weekend, they turn the camera off. Only when they're on site, on duty, way to go. But even if you couldn't go there, I do understand there are some other factors that go into some people's consideration of this bill. But I just wanted to assure you, in no terms was this ever designed to be anything more than to try to solve a problem on Teton Pass and to be able to keep legal trucks rolling over it. That was it. That was the sole intention of this bill. And so with that, I know you got a hard stop coming, and I want to give a chance to answer any questions you have to try to allay any concerns that you have or amplify any explanations. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity.
Senator Grew, thank you. I'm going to go to Senator Pappas. He's got a question.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it, Senator Guru. But as I look at the bill, and tell me if I'm reading this wrong, but if you go to page 3 in the first 5 lines, it says the department or local authority may employ automatic vehicle identification systems to detect a speed limit violation, size or weight limit violation, and to protect contractors or employees in a school or construction zone. I see the bill as only allowing those things in a school, and I don't even see it allowing it on Teton Pass or any other highway or any other place other than a school or construction zone. Am I reading that wrong?
Well,
Senator Grew, do we have Teton Pass in this bill?
I feel like we do, but the problem actually was that and I don't know if General Reiner wants to help me out with this or not, if he can, to try to help me out through this. It got a little bit convoluted when we started adding these other deals, and that's why I asked LSO. I didn't write these amendments to cut these pieces out. I asked LSO to actually write them and to cut them out. And so I may have overdone my own hand, which means I'd have to go back to work on it. But General Reiner, do you have, or Mr. Chairman, would it be okay to ask General?
Senator Grew, I'm going to go to the director, and just so the committee knows, this is informational today. I see a hand already up in the public, and we're not going to go to public testimony today on this bill. This is background information to help our new committee to get up to speed to what was an interim topic. It was discussed at some length throughout the last year, to not very much testimony, quite honestly. And so I thought it was important that our committee today get up to speed with the genesis of the bill. And so, Director Reiner, let's go to you. And as we run out of time today, I am interested in any thoughts you have about this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In terms of background, I absolutely agree with Senator Grew on the topic. I worry about Teton Pass and that road, Highway 22. That's the road I worry about the most in our state for multiple reasons. But one of the reasons is indeed the heavy truck traffic. Senator Grew certainly did come to me and say, hey, we've got a problem up there. And we're in the business of trying to ameliorate the issues on that stretch of road. We do currently have a scale at the top of that pass, and we do have a camera, and we do know who's overweight, and we capture them. And if we're able to get a trooper there in time, we do give tickets, but we don't have enough troopers to hit them all. And Senator Grew is correct. We don't have the money or the resources to permanently station somebody at the top of that pass. So that is an issue. We have several truck arresters coming down that hill, but really our primary one is currently not in operation based on some technical issues we've had over the past year. We certainly intend to get that into operation as soon as we can. It's a funding priority for us. In fact, I was going to go out there for a test this month in January, but there were some delays. So we're working that stretch of road, and I certainly agree that that is an issue that I think we need to address. And a good way to address it in that specific area would be remote enforcement. We already have the technology in place actually there, and in this case, it would take legislative approval to do. I certainly asked, as the director of WYDOT, that Senator Grew would include construction zones in this bill, because as the individual responsible for the safety of 2,000 men and women wearing orange, I really want people to drive the speed limit in construction zones, and the habit is we don't. And so it's a safety issue for me for construction zones. I agree with Senator Grew. Active construction zones makes a lot of sense to me, and so that's the background. Certainly, I have no argument with school zones, and supported the concept of school zones in the bill as we progress through the interim. And in my mind, those were the three specific areas that we had targeted: school, construction, and overweight, issues on Teton Pass. To Senator Papa's discussion on the line, the first sentence, I go back to, I think the intent was what I just described: overweight and oversize, specifically really overweight, and construction school zones. I think that if that's the intent, it has to be tightened up, because I agree. I think you can read it multiple ways. But Senator Lamb, I know we aren't going to work the bill like that, but really in terms of, intent and history, really, I think we're on the same sheet of music. We got a problem on Teton Pass, and I would very much like to address active construction zones.
Okay, so Director Renner, thank you for that. Senator Pappas.
Thank you. Senator Grew and Director Reiner, I appreciate that. Again, my intent, personally, I'm in favor of providing this kind of technology in school zones and in construction zones. I think it makes perfect sense. I've been flooded, and probably you've all been flooded with emails about we're taking away privacy issues, and we're going to try to fund the state by citing people all over the state with traffic violations. And I think folks don't understand what we're trying to get at here. So there's going to be some amount of education that needs to happen. But I still think that there's something wrong in the language, and perhaps I can ask one of the LSO attorneys to read it. But to me, it won't apply as it's written to Teton County, the Pasadena County. It just says violations in a school zone or construction zone. So if we need to fix that, if that's our intent, and if it's outside of those two zones and we want to add particular locations, we probably need to just specify those locations, because I don't see this as a statewide, we set up a sign anywhere, a camera and a sign anywhere we want. I don't see that in this bill.
Senator Pappas, I agree with everything you said, and I think you get a sense of why I'm going where I'm going with this bill. Senator Grew, I'll give you a chance here in just a second. I do want to say that I think, given all of the distortion and the way that was presented through a lobby group or whatever, I just think there's a lot of misunderstanding about this bill. And so I thought it was important today that we at least get the proper genesis and the proper intention of the bill. Now, in my view, it is at least important enough, based on the director's comments today and based on the good senator's evidence from up there in Teton County, that we push this forward and at least see if we can fix the bill. I want to make sure that it encompasses the original intent, which is up there in the western part of the state. I've been on that highway 3 times the last 2 years, and the senator is absolutely correct. It is Grand Prix in the morning and in the evening up there, and we've got people skiing and carrying skis. We need to address that. So I think committee, what we will do, let's carry this forward. We will be meeting in session during the month of March. And that would give us time and ability, all of us, to work with each other and to work with the original sponsor of this legislation, running it by the director of WYDOT, and see if we can get a bill that doesn't have quite so many white caps on the water. That's my inclination. I think it has enough merit, now that we know exactly what the bill does, to at least consider it a little bit further. How about that? So Senator Drew, any final thoughts today on this?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess, yeah, and I think that Senator Pappas, I think you're absolutely right. I think we've rewritten it so many times now that it was going more the other way than it was the way I originally intended. And I think maybe a substitute, this is one of the things that may be right for a substitute bill, to just clarify and get exactly where we want to go and pull all that other stuff out, and then go about it the other way. If the group, if the committee wants to opt into any of those other things, they can vote to opt into them, and we cut it back to the bare bones and see if that'll work. If it'll work for you all, if there's, because that's frankly, with all that's generated, or all the stuff that's been generated about this bill, what I don't want to do is spend a lot of your time working on this and have it get to the floor and just die. And of its own weight, just because of what's been said about it, which I think is extremely unfortunate. I wish someone had just picked up the phone and called, but hey, that's the way it works. And so what I can do is go back and do and work on the substitute bill, maybe to bring to you all at your next meeting. Perfectly happy to do it. I appreciate the thought. Unless you say, no, I don't want to deal with it. I'm hearing, the chairman say, do it. If anybody's got a big problem with it, let's talk about it.
Thank you, Senator. I think we'll take you up on that. And I know Senator Pappas.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think this is a very important issue, and I'd be glad to work with Mike offline to see what we can do to amend or fix this bill to get back to its original intent, and perhaps the intent of the director, which I agree with. But hopefully, maybe the media today will pick up some of this and broadcast to the public that that's some of the thoughts that have gone around, that I've gotten emails and phone calls with misinformation. And so I'm hoping that maybe some good information will get out there, and we'll be able to show the folks that we're really looking at safety in this bill. It's purely a safety bill. It's not a bill intended to raise revenue or Big Brother to surveil us. It's purely a safety bill.
Thank you, Senator. I agree. And Director Reiner, I do want to go to you and ask specifically if you'd be willing to work with us and see if we can modify and sharpen and maybe get this bill ready for another look.
Mr. Chairman, that would be my pleasure. I see this as a key and critical safety issue on our roads, and absolutely would think is key that we're involved in, would appreciate that opportunity. I think the one other thing I'd add, Mr. Chairman, and Senator Drew hit it, is there is precedent, and it's with our school buses. And so in my mind, what we as a state have said is, if there's an important enough safety consideration, we're willing to do this. And so right now, if you drive by a school bus with the stop sign out, you do get a ticket, and it's through an automated process. And so in my mind, the precedent that was set several years ago with the passage of that legislation is key in this discussion.
So Director, thank you for that. And having served on the committee that sponsored that bill, very familiar with the efforts on behalf of the bus situation. You remember we lost a young girl up in Fremont County because somebody blew through the blinking red lights. And when it comes to safety, we've got to be all about that. So committee, I hope that was helpful today. Senator Drew, I really appreciate you taking the time to be here to give us valuable background. And Director Reiner, you staying on as well to help us understand. And committee, I hope that's helpful because you are hearing from a lot of people. I think there has been a lot of misinformation on this bill. At least we are now able to talk to people and say, this is what, whether we still don't support it or whatever, at least we'll have the information. So anything else for the good of the cause? We're coming up on a hard stop, committee. Senator Furphy, thank you. Senator McEwen, good to have you aboard. Senator Pappas, great job today. We will see what next week brings. We have a virtual few days that we'll be together, and I look forward to March when we can be together in person. I think that'll be better. But anything else, committee? Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Amanda, for all your help today. We are adjourned.